on my first day back with my wealthy birth family. Their precious adopted son accused me of stealing a gemstone necklace. The moment my billionaire parents heard, they ordered me to kneel and admit I was wrong. My 6 older sisters even wanted to drag me to the police station. If none of you are going to listen to reason, then don't blame a cultivator like me for teaching you how to be decent human beings again. But before I could even make a move, my blind fool of a dad lashed out with his whip. Crack. The whip barely missed me as it came down, snapping sharply through the air. Before Robert Carter could even react, my fist slammed hard into his face. A dull thud echoed through the room. Robert's vision went black, and he toppled straight to the floor. The room went dead silent, aside from Robert curling up in pain on the floor. Everyone else stood frozen in place, staring at me in stunned disbelief. No one had expected the quiet, useless loser they all looked down on to suddenly fight back. I acted like nothing had happened and calmly pulled my phone from my pocket, then dialed 1110. Hello? 110? I'd like to report a crime. There's been a burglary at Xingtian Manor on Binhai Road. A gemstone necklace worth 11 million was stolen, and someone here has also assaulted an innocent person. The instant I ended the call, it was like someone had pressed play on the entire room. Victoria Carter shot up from the couch, pointed at me, and screamed, "You worthless piece of trash. You've only been home 3 days, and you're already stealing from us. And you actually have the nerve to call the police?" Ethan Carter also dropped his stunned expression and immediately put on his usual innocent, well-behaved act. "Bro, Mom always says we shouldn't air the family's dirty laundry. We know your adoptive parents were poor, and you've probably never seen things like this before. But stealing our sister's necklace and selling it is way too far. If the police get involved, stealing something worth over 10 million could put you in prison." His voice gradually trailed off when he noticed that my phone camera was pointed straight at them. "What? Why'd you stop talking?" I let out a cold laugh and waved my phone. "Don't worry. I already recorded everything. Every word you just said can be used as evidence, and with more than 10 million involved, yeah, that's definitely enough to put someone behind bars for years. You bastard. Who gave you permission to record us?" Victoria suddenly sprang at me, charging over in a rage and reaching for my phone. I easily dodged her, raising my phone high with my left hand. While using my right to block Victoria's attacks, I adjusted the angle, making sure both Victoria and the entire room were in frame. "I'm telling you right now, you're violating my image rights. I'm going to sue you," Victoria shrieked, her voice painfully sharp. "You obviously stole my necklace. Ethan saw you coming out of my room this morning. He saw it with his own eyes. Then my necklace disappeared. If you didn't steal it, who else could have? You disgusting creep. God knows what filthy things you were doing in my room." She cursed while clawing at me like crazy. Before long, several scratches and bite marks covered my arm. "You worthless brat." Robert clutched his swollen face and picked up the whip from the floor but didn't dare swing it, afraid he might hit Victoria by accident. Instead, he shouted toward the doorway, "Frank! What are you standing there for? Get Brian Walker over here." The moment I heard Brian's name, I made my decision. I knocked Victoria's hand away, grabbed her shoulder with my left hand, and locked my right arm around her neck before dragging her into the corner. Then I snatched a porcelain plate off the table and smashed it. I picked up the largest shard and pressed it against Victoria's throat. "Nobody move. We wait for the police. Otherwise, I'll kill her." My voice was cold and unwavering. The room instantly went silent. The head butler and Brian had just reached the doorway, but after seeing the scene, neither dared make a move. Ding. Victoria struggled a few times, but my arm held her like an iron clamp, leaving her barely able to breathe. "What are you trying to do?" Victoria's voice trembled. I didn't answer. I simply stared coldly at everyone in the room, while keeping the porcelain shard pressed firmly against Victoria's throat. "You animal." Robert was furious beyond words, his voice squeezing through clenched teeth. "She's your sister." "My sister?" I laughed coldly, my gaze sharp as a blade. "You, Robert Carter, never treated me like your son. Victoria never treated me like her brother. So why the hell should I treat her like my sister? I'll say it one more time. If anyone takes one step forward, I'll kill her. After all, I'm just a worthless piece of trash." So I'll trade my worthless life for your precious daughter's noble one. Ding dong. The doorbell suddenly rang. The piercing sound was especially jarring in the silent room. Every nerve in my body instantly tightened. The porcelain shard in my hand pressed even harder against Victoria's throat until it actually broke her skin, and a thin line of blood appeared. I didn't dare relax for even a second, afraid this might be another Carter family trap. Is that the police? I muttered under my breath, my eyes alert, as they swept across every corner of the room. Then I saw a maid hurry over to Robert and whisper a few words to him. Robert's expression instantly turned grim. His gaze flickered back and forth between Victoria and me, until he finally seemed to make up his mind. He gritted his teeth. Let them in. A moment later, the maid led two men in police uniforms into the room. The taller one shouted as soon as he entered, "Who called the police?" "Bro, look." The shorter officer pointed toward the corner, where I was holding Victoria hostage, his voice full of surprise. "Hey, kid." The taller officer forced himself to stay calm as he tried to talk me down. "Don't do anything rash. Whatever happened, tell us about it. We're police officers. We'll make sure you get justice. Just let her go first, okay?" I gave the two of them a cold once-over and immediately knew what was going on. Then I laughed, my voice dripping with mockery. "Robert Carter, you really are unbelievably stupid. Impersonating police officers? That's another crime to add to the list. Watch your mouth, kid." The shorter officer immediately snapped back. "We're real police officers." "Really?" I sneered. "I entered the police academy at 18, graduated at 22, joined the force at 23, and worked until I was 35. Before I crossed into this world, I had 12 years on the force. And you two idiots think you can fool me? Take out your phones and call 110. Give the dispatch center your badge numbers." When the two of them hesitated, my smile grew even more mocking. "Robert Carter, you didn't even bother doing your homework? My adoptive dad retired from a government agency. I've met plenty of cops. Police badge numbers have 7 digits and start with 01. So what are you two supposed to be from the Supreme Procuratorate? The courts, or the Ministry of Public Security? With the way you two look, you expect me to believe you're cops?" The room fell completely silent. Only my voice echoed through it. My gaze was sharp as a hawk's, while the porcelain shard in my hand remained pressed tightly against Victoria's throat, as though I could slit it at any second. Just then, a man in a black security uniform hurried over to Robert and said a few words to him. Robert's face instantly went pale. "You seriously told the real police to leave?" I let out a cold laugh and pressed the shard even harder. Victoria's face was already starting to turn blue. "Then you'd better get ready to bury your daughter. They're the real police this time." Robert's voice was filled with panic. He was obviously trapped with no way out. After struggling with himself for a moment, he finally softened his tone. "Son, we can talk this out." "There's nothing to talk about," I refused flatly. "The moment your whip came down on me, there was nothing left to discuss. Don't think I don't know what you're planning. If I don't see the real police, you'll be collecting your daughter's body." I stared coldly at Robert, my eyes filled with contempt. A dad forcing his own son to kill his own daughter. If that's the kind of show you want to see, I'd be more than happy to put it on for you. At those words, Robert's face went from red to white and back again. He couldn't understand it no matter how hard he tried. Just 2 days ago, I had been completely under his control. So how had I suddenly become this defiant? After weighing his options, he finally gritted his teeth. "Let the police in." The maid hurried away. Not long afterward, a series of steady, heavy footsteps approached. A middle-aged police officer and a younger officer walked into the living room. "Other officers got here before us?" the younger officer asked quietly in confusion. The moment the middle-aged officer entered, he saw the situation and immediately raised both hands. His voice was calm and gentle. "Easy, son. We're police officers. My badge number is 03663. My name is Officer Daniel Sullivan. You can call 110 and verify my badge number. But trust me, Shanghai isn't a place where people can just ignore the law. We'll make sure you get a fair explanation." Some of the tension finally left my body. With all my years of experience, I was almost certain he was a real cop. But I still said cautiously, "Call 110 from your own phone. I need to verify your identity." "Of course," Officer Sullivan immediately pulled out his phone and dialed 100 right in front of me. The operator quickly confirmed Officer Sullivan's identity. Only then did I finally breathe a sigh of relief, and lower the porcelain shard in my hand. Victoria collapsed to the floor like all the strength had left her body. I'm the one who called the police. I pointed at Robert and the others, my voice steady. They've been abusing me, and they falsely accused me of stealing from them. Grace Carter immediately rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Victoria, brain hysterically. You monster! What did I do in my past life to deserve this? How did I give birth to such an ungrateful son? We brought you back into the Carter family out of kindness. We gave you food and a home. We gave you the best of everything. And look at what you've done. You stole your sister's necklace. You refuse to listen to anyone. And now you're threatening your own family. Family problems should stay inside the family. But you just had to. Victoria clung to her mother and burst into tears. He tried to kill me. I told you from the beginning, Ethan is the only brother we need in this family. He's an ungrateful animal. Officers, arrest him right now. Make sure he spends the rest of his life in prison, ignoring the pain all over my body. I pulled up the video on my phone, officer. This is what actually happened. The Carter family's precious adopted son accused me of stealing a gemstone necklace. As I played the video, I explained everything from beginning to end. Just then, I suddenly noticed the two Carter family security guards who had impersonated police officers. Trying to quietly slip away, I immediately barked, "Stop right there." I lunged forward, grabbed both of them by the arms, and yanked them back. Officer, look at this. The Carter family actually had people impersonate police officers. And there's more. I raised my arm, revealing the welts left by the whip. Take a look at these injuries too. They were all caused by the man who claims to be my biological dad, Robert Carter. Officer Sullivan frowned. Clearly, the situation was much more complicated than he'd expected. He took a deep breath and said to me, "Son, don't worry. We'll investigate everything. For now, come back to the station with us and give a statement." I stayed silent for a moment before nodding. Then I took off my shirt, revealing injuries all over my body. My voice remained calm and firm. Robert Carter says I'm his biological son. But the moment I came back, they locked me in a basement storage room. It's damp, dark, and filthy down there. It's not fit for anyone to live in. That so-called adopted son accused me of stealing Victoria's necklace. But I've only been here for 3 days. On the first day, I was warned not to go upstairs. On the second day, I wanted to go out with my friend, but they locked me in the basement instead. They didn't give me food or water, and I wasn't let out until just now. So when exactly was I supposed to steal that necklace? "You're lying," Grace shrieked, cutting me off. "You clearly wanted to go hang around with those good-for-nothing street punks. You call friends. You even said you wanted to bring them here. The Carter family has standards. We can't tolerate behavior like yours." Robert quickly chimed in. "Officer Sullivan, I admit I went a little too far today, but he's still my biological son. His adoptive parents spoiled him rotten. We can't just stand by and let him turn into some delinquent who steals from people." "Delinquent?" I let out a cold laugh and swept my gaze across the room. "Who exactly? Are you talking about Ethan Carter? Where is he? Why is he suddenly gone?" I looked around the room and realized Ethan had disappeared without anyone noticing. He had probably run off to find some backup. But it didn't matter. I'd already recorded every word they'd said. Bro, just then, Ethan rushed back into the living room, breathing hard, with a middle-aged man following behind him. He looked anxious, as if he had something urgent to say, but froze when he saw the scene in front of him. "Where did you go?" Robert asked irritably. He genuinely hadn't noticed Ethan leave earlier. I saw how serious things were. "So I went to get Dr. Lucas Bennett. He's a psychologist and a trained negotiator. I thought he might be able to calm my brother down." Ethan put on an innocent expression. "Oh, right! How did I forget about that?" Robert slapped his forehead, his eyes full of approval. "Ethan really is the smart one. I was so panicked. I completely forgot. Frank, look at the terrible idea you came up with. Having people impersonate police officers. This was all just a misunderstanding. Whether it was a misunderstanding or not, we'll investigate that ourselves." Officer Sullivan glanced coldly at the injuries covering my body, then looked back at the video. If what this young man says is true, then you're already suspected of unlawful detention and intentional assault. And according to the original report, a necklace worth more than $10 million is missing. That's an extremely large amount of money. We'll be investigating all of it. All you need to do is cooperate. He gave the younger officer a look. Go take statements from the Carter daughters, as well as the sons, Mr. Carter and Mrs. Carter. Also, Mr. Carter, I need you to provide the villa's surveillance footage. Yes. Robert had barely opened his mouth when Ethan cut in with a smile. Officer Sullivan, our security cameras just happened to stop working a few days ago. And this is really just a family matter. Mom and Dad only wanted my brother to have a better social circle and make real friends instead of hanging around with street punks. There's nothing wrong with that, is there? Maybe their methods were a little extreme, but that's normal. When I was younger and made friends Mom didn't approve of, she'd lock me in my room and refuse to let me go out too. I waited until Ethan finished speaking and made sure the recording had captured everything before I said, Officer Sullivan, my adoptive dad's name is George Miller. He retired from the provincial government 2 years ago. The friend who called me yesterday is Ryan Mitchell. His dad is Michael Mitchell, and he works at the Municipal Public Security Bureau. You should know him, right? I opened the photo gallery on my phone and pulled up several pictures of Ryan and me on the basketball court. We're both students at No. 3 high school. We're taking the college entrance exam together this year, and we're in the same class. I paused and looked up at Officer Sullivan before continuing, and look at what this family has done. Impersonating police officers, unlawfully detaining me, assaulting me for no reason, and now property worth more than $10 million has mysteriously disappeared. Is this really something that ends with us simply giving statements? I lightly raised the phone in my hand, then added, I recorded our conversation just now too, and I've already sent it to Ryan Mitchell. Officer Sullivan's expression instantly darkened. He turned to his partner without expression. Officer Lewis, call for backup, as the two officers requested additional units, and their expressions grew serious. I quietly stood to the side and watched. Robert, meanwhile, immediately called the Mitchell family, trying to explain the situation, but I watched his expression darken as he stared at his phone. What's going on? He muttered to himself. Clearly, every call he made was going unanswered. He turned toward Grace in confusion. Honey, did you get through to Michael's wife? Grace shook her head, looking just as confused. The moment I mentioned that the friend who had contacted me yesterday was Ryan Mitchell, Robert had clearly realized he was in trouble. His hands were almost trembling as he lowered his head and looked at the 6 calls he'd already made. Every single one had gone unanswered. At that moment, he seemed to suddenly remember something his dad had once warned him about. The mainland isn't like other places. No matter how big your business becomes, never look down on people whose monthly salary isn't even as much as your spending money, and whatever you do, don't offend them. Just then, the shrill wail of sirens rang out, cutting through the night. I could hear police cars rapidly approaching. No one even needed to announce them. A large group of officers poured straight into the villa. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, and you two young men, please come with us. This time, the man taking the lead wasn't Officer Sullivan, but another officer who had just arrived. He was still wearing his coat, and looked like he'd rushed over in a hurry. I quietly memorized his face. Robert's eyes immediately lit up, and he hurried forward like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. Deputy Chief, you came here personally? Look, Before he could finish, 2 officers stepped in and stopped him. Deputy Chief Thomas Hayes gave Robert a cold glance, his expression completely unreadable. Mr. Carter, we've known each other for some time, and you're a respectable man, so don't make this difficult for me. I won't. Robert craned his neck anxiously, trying to push past the officers blocking him. This whole thing is a misunderstanding. It's a family matter. Deputy Chief Hayes waved a hand. I know. It's a misunderstanding. We can discuss it slowly once we get to the station. With that, he gave a subtle signal, and 2 officers immediately stepped forward and handcuffed Robert before escorting him outside. No matter how hard Robert struggled, it was useless. More officers surged in and restrained the rest of the Carter family. Victoria and Ethan were quickly handcuffed as well and taken away together. At the same time, Deputy Chief Hayes ordered his men to seal off the scene, secure the surveillance recordings, and formally collect statements from everyone in the Carter family. He even specifically ordered officers to examine Victoria's room for fingerprints, hair, and other physical evidence. It didn't take long before Deputy Chief Hayes walked over to me and carefully looked me over. When his gaze fell on my body covered in injuries, his originally cold expression gradually became complicated and even showed a hint of sympathy. His voice sank as he immediately turned toward the two officers who had arrived earlier and snapped, "What the hell are you two doing? Can't you see this kid is covered in injuries? Get him to a hospital right now and have his injuries formally evaluated while you're at it." The two officers lowered their heads after being scolded and quickly nodded. Deputy Chief Hayes glared at them again. "Well, move. Take him to Jinghai First Military Hospital." Deputy Chief Hayes, Officer Lewis was still a little stunned, but Officer Sullivan smacked him on the back of the head, then apologized with an embarrassed expression. "Deputy Chief, this kid only joined us this year. He's a little slow, and this is his first time dealing with something like this." "Don't be mad. I'm not." Deputy Chief Hayes waved it off. "Just get moving." Then he turned toward me, his tone much gentler. "Son, can you still walk?" I nodded. "Yeah." "Then, let's go." Deputy Chief Hayes walked with me out of the Carter estate. My entire body throbbed with pain, but I forced myself to keep going without showing weakness. Along the way, he questioned me in detail about everything I'd experienced over the past few days, asking about every part of what had happened. I answered while carefully emphasizing the right details, doing my best to make the Carter family's actions as clear and serious as possible. By the time we got into the police car, I heard Deputy Chief Hayes sitting beside me murmur, "A necklace worth $10 million. Jinghai hasn't seen a case involving this much money in years." I froze for a moment, before immediately understanding what he meant. As someone who'd spent 12 years as a cop in my previous life, I could hear the implication behind his words, loud and clear. He was obviously planning to use this case to stir up something much bigger. And when I thought about it carefully, it made perfect sense. If this had only been about me being locked in a basement and whipped a few times, it really wouldn't have justified such a large-scale response. There were clearly deeper considerations behind this whole thing. Guy sighed and said, "Ethan probably stole the necklace. He's Robert and Grace Carter's adopted son. The Carter family spoils him rotten, so they'll probably refuse to press charges against him. At most, I could go after him for defamation, but if that happens, the case goes from criminal to civil. I was locked up for a day and a half, and I'm covered in injuries, but that's probably only enough for an administrative security violation. It doesn't reach the threshold for a criminal offense." I paused briefly, then added, "So this bigger case you're hoping to build might not be that easy." Deputy Chief Hayes didn't say much after hearing that. Clearly, from the evidence at the scene and everything I'd told him, he had already pieced together the entire situation. This case really wouldn't be easy to expand. But that didn't mean it was impossible. The Carter family had gotten far too arrogant over the past few years. He silently organized his thoughts and fell deep into contemplation. I quietly closed my eyes and began carefully sorting through the memories of this body's original owner. When the Carter family incident first happened, I'd only rushed through the memories of the previous 3 days. Now that I finally had time, I wanted to properly examine all 18 years of this body's life. Those memories felt both incredibly long and strangely brief. Brief enough that after crossing into this world, I'd skimmed through them in less than 3 minutes. And yet, there was still more than enough to require hours of careful sorting. I had no idea how much time passed before I suddenly discovered a strange fragment, starting from the age of 5. This body's original owner had apparently been having the same kind of dream over and over. In those dreams, an old man constantly taught him lessons. As I concentrated and dug deeper, those memories gradually became clearer. Lessons taught in dreams. A strange excitement surged through me, and I focused all my attention on those bizarre memories. What had started as faint, indistinct murmurs slowly became words I could hear clearly, one by one. I realized these hadn't been ordinary dreams at all. Memories flooded into my mind like a tidal wave. They told the story of a bizarre second life that began on his 5th birthday. That day, I'd encountered a dying old beggar on the street out of a child's simple kindness. I'd called emergency services without hesitation, and even used the allowance I'd saved for a long time to cover the old man's medical expenses. But that old beggar turned out to be a cultivator who had lived for 600 years, with spiritual energy drying up and no path forward left to him. He had reached the final moments of his life and chosen me as his successor. From that day onward, my dreams were occupied by a thin, elderly man. He would stand beneath an ancient crooked pine at the summit of a mountain, surrounded by swirling clouds and mist, and teach me profound, nearly incomprehensible cultivation techniques. Those dreams continued day after day for an entire decade. The old man claimed to be the 71st disciple of the Qingwei sect, whose lineage traced back to Tai Zhenren, one of the 12 golden immortals. Yet even after more than 600 years of cultivation, he had failed to ascend. Now, with spiritual energy exhausted and his path completely cut off, he chose to pass everything he'd learned in his lifetime on to me, making me the 72nd disciple of the Qingwei sect. Reality, however, had been brutally cruel. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't sense even the slightest trace of spiritual energy. That journey from hope to disappointment, and finally to despair, had nearly driven the original owner of this body to the breaking point. He began to suspect that all of it had been nothing more than fantasy, and even sought answers through modern medicine, but found nothing. After reviewing all those memories, I let out a soft sigh. The words spiritual energy depletion explained everything. Without spiritual energy, I was no different from one of those fake masters scamming people. The martial arts and sword techniques might still be somewhat useful, but everything else required spiritual energy to work. I slowly opened my eyes and thought to myself, I crossed into another world, didn't I? As a transmigrator, shouldn't I at least get some kind of special advantage? System, are you there? I silently called out a few times, but no cheerful ding sounded in my head. All I could do was sigh. Then I pulled out my phone and checked the remaining drive. The military hospital was one of the best hospitals in Jianghai, and was also one of the designated facilities used by the Public Security Department for medical examinations and treatment, unless the person requesting an injury evaluation had a special requirement, or specifically requested another facility. Injury assessments were normally performed there as well. The map showed we still had about an hour before arriving. After roughly calculating the time, I followed the memories of this body's original owner, formed the 5 hearts facing heaven meditation posture, and began following the cultivation method I'd been taught. Following the method the old cultivator had taught me, I relaxed my entire body and rested both hands flat on my thighs, with my palms facing upward, forming a simple 5 hearts facing heaven meditation posture. As I tried to breathe in and absorb spiritual energy, about 10 minutes passed, when I suddenly felt something enter through my right wrist and spread from there throughout my entire body. This is spiritual energy. A surge of wild excitement rushed through me, although I wasn't sure whether this really was the legendary spiritual energy or why it was entering through my right wrist. Wasn't spiritual energy supposed to have completely dried up? So why was I suddenly able to sense it, despite all the questions racing through my mind? I knew an opportunity like this couldn't be wasted, because it might never come again. I immediately followed the breathing and circulation technique the old cultivator had taught me, and began guiding that strange energy through my body. Gradually, it gathered in my lower abdomen, and even the pain from my injuries seemed to ease slightly, though the wounds themselves were still there. Then I opened my eyes. Wait, does this mean I've actually become a cultivator? My heart pounded with excitement. The original owner of this body had squeezed time out of his exhausting schoolwork and extracurricular classes, whenever he could, and practiced cultivation for more than 3 whole years. Forget drawing spiritual energy into his body. He hadn't even managed to improve his physical condition. Instead, he'd nearly driven himself into a nervous breakdown. So, how had I managed it in less than half an hour? I quickly closed my eyes and focused again. Deep inside my lower abdomen, I could clearly sense that faint but undeniably real power. It was as if a door to an entirely new world had opened before me. I didn't dare relax for even a second, and continued following the old cultivator's method, guiding that power through my meridians, and slowly circulating it throughout my body with every complete cycle. The energy became slightly denser. I actually did it. But why does something feel wrong? Before I could fully immerse myself in this sudden rush of joy, an inexplicable sense of danger suddenly rose inside me. The energy was weak, but I could clearly tell that its source wasn't stable. More importantly, this was completely different from what the old man had described. My entire body was supposed to be immersed in spiritual energy, surrounded by it and absorbing it from all directions. But only a tiny part of my body was surrounded by spiritual energy. And the source of that energy, I suddenly lowered my head and stared at my right wrist. A faint warm glow was coming from it. My heart skipped, and I quickly pulled up my sleeve. Only then did I realize that a jade bracelet had somehow appeared around my wrist. The jade felt smooth and warm, its color soft and elegant, with an unmistakably ancient quality to it. This is that jade bracelet. I immediately raised my wrist and examined it carefully. Judging by its color, it had to be the same bracelet I'd discovered at the bottom of the sea before I transmigrated. The green jade bracelet that had been wrapped around the bones of a corpse. Tiles. The only difference was that the bracelet now looked even smoother and more lustrous, and some strange energy seemed to be flowing inside it, giving off a faint but beautiful emerald glow. This is spiritual energy. Since I'd already drawn some spiritual energy into my body and gathered it in my lower abdomen, according to what the old cultivator had taught me, I'd completed the stage of drawing spiritual energy into the body, which meant I'd officially stepped onto the path of cultivation. That was why I could sense the energy inside the bracelet was exactly the same as the energy now inside me. This really is one hell of a treasure. I tried taking the bracelet off so I could study it more carefully, but no matter how hard I pulled, it remained firmly locked around my wrist. The moment I tried to remove it, the bracelet automatically tightened against my skin. Since I finally had some spiritual energy, I might as well take advantage of it while I could. I returned to the 5 hearts facing heaven posture and began circulating the spiritual energy again. But my excitement didn't last very long, because I soon discovered that there wasn't much spiritual energy inside the bracelet at the rate I was consuming it. Another full circulation cycle would probably drain it completely. This isn't nearly enough. I sighed inwardly. I'd originally hoped I could use this spiritual energy to truly begin cultivating, but it looked like I'd still have to find another way. So I did get a transmigrator's special advantage, but it was painfully limited. While I was still worrying about it, the car slowly came to a stop. We had arrived at the military hospital. I immediately pushed those thoughts aside and got out. The fresh air around the military hospital carried a faint medicinal scent as it washed over me, but my mind was still a complete mess. Transmigration, cultivation, a real heir and an adopted heir fighting over a wealthy family. I honestly felt like nothing from my 35 years in my previous life had been as ridiculous as everything that happened today. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. Deputy Chief Hayes noticed my tension, but had no idea what I was really thinking. He assumed I was scared, or didn't know how to face my adoptive parents. Although he clearly had his own thoughts about the situation, none of them showed on his face. He simply comforted me gently. Don't be afraid. You're only here for a checkup. What's done is done. Parents and children don't stay angry forever. Even if you're not their biological son. They still raised you, didn't they? I forced a faint smile and shook my head. Deputy Chief Hayes, I'm fine. I know what I need to do, seeing that I genuinely seemed to have reflected on things. Deputy Chief Hayes had Officer Lewis take me inside. I was quickly brought into the emergency room, where the doctors examined my injuries with practiced efficiency. Afterward, I was transferred to the Forensic Injury Assessment Department for photographs and evaluation. Once all the procedures were finished, I lay down on a hospital bed and began recalling everything that had happened since the original owner learned the truth about his birth. The first time he'd met his biological parents had been in the lobby of Baixiang Garden Restaurant, where his adoptive parents were holding his 18th birthday banquet and college entrance celebration. That chance encounter had started the entire process of confirming his identity. The original owner had been an idiot. He hadn't noticed his biological parents' reluctance or constant delays. Instead, once he learned he was the biological son of Shanghai's richest family, he immediately became arrogant. Maybe it was because, for more than a decade, His adoptive parents had always disciplined him strictly, and he hadn't even dared rebel much during his rebellious teenage years. So everything finally exploded at once. Fortunately, the worst thing he'd done during that outburst was flip over a dining table once. He hadn't done anything truly outrageous. Most of the time, he'd just thrown sarcastic remarks at his adoptive parents and accused them of stealing his life from him by keeping him from meeting his biological parents. After reviewing the original owner's behavior, I sighed inwardly. At least there was still a chance to fix things. Once my injury assessment was complete, Deputy Chief Hayes accompanied me to a hospital waiting room. We hadn't been sitting there long when the door quietly opened and a middle-aged couple hurried inside. Their eyes were filled with worry and a little reproach, but more than anything, there was unmistakable parental love. I recognized them instantly. Almost instinctively, I slid down from my chair, knelt before them, and bowed my head to the floor 3 times. Dad, Mom, I'm sorry. I knelt to repay the debt the original owner owed his adoptive parents. Linda Miller stumbled back in shock when she saw me suddenly kneel and bow. But when she saw the injuries covering my body, her heart seemed to break. Pain filled her eyes as she hurried toward me. She wanted to hug me, but was terrified of hurting me. Her eyes instantly turned red. Her hands trembled as she reached down to help me up, and her voice choked with emotion. Sweetheart, what are you doing? Get up. The floor is cold. Those damned Carters. Even if you really did something wrong, they still couldn't do this to you. How could they be so cruel? Linda was crying so hard she could barely speak. She turned toward my adoptive dad, George Miller, and sobbed, You stubborn old man. Why are you just standing there without saying anything? The Carter family beat your son like this. Are you really going to just stand there and watch? George acted as if he hadn't heard her. His hands were clenched tightly into fists, and his expression was terrifyingly dark. His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes were colder than ever as he stared at me. So now you know you were wrong? The Carter family treated you like that, and you still couldn't wait to run back and claim them as family. Linda, stop defending this brat. He doesn't even care about the 2 old fools who raised him. He only remembered us after they beat him half to death. After we spent more than 10 years raising him, you brought this on yourself. Hearing her husband's words, Linda's tears fell even harder. She wiped them away while instinctively shielding me. George, don't say that. Tyler must be hurting inside too. Those are his biological parents. Who could have imagined his own parents would treat him like this? I looked at my adoptive parents, overwhelmed with guilt. I knew the way the original owner had behaved lately had truly broken their hearts. I also knew George was all bark and no bite when it came to me. If he'd really given up on me, he wouldn't have shown up here at all. Right now, he was simply venting everything he'd kept bottled up for the past month. I'm sorry, Dad. Tears streamed down my face, and I silently swore I'd spend the rest of my life treating them right, to make up for the mistakes the original owner had made. That single word, Dad, hit George like a hammer. The stern father act he'd been maintaining almost completely fell apart. This was his son. You could grow attached to a dog after raising it for more than 10 years, let alone a son he'd poured his heart, effort, and love into raising. For all his outward strictness, even when I'd genuinely done something wrong in the past, he'd always lectured me first and avoided punishment whenever possible. Even when punishment was necessary, he'd explain exactly what had happened and why I was being punished. Even when he disciplined me physically, he had never once beaten me the way I'd been beaten today. Until my skin split open and my entire body was covered in wounds. Even though I'd driven him crazy over the past month, he could still understand why I'd acted that way. Who wouldn't be excited after finally finding their biological parents? When George and Linda first adopted me, I was already over 2 years old, almost 3, old enough to understand and remember things. They knew orphan children could be timid and extremely sensitive, terrified that they might be abandoned again. Which is why I'd always been so careful around my adoptive parents. Then, after suddenly learning who my biological parents were, my personality changed completely. It was the explosive backlash of more than 10 years, spent living cautiously and trying not to make mistakes. George didn't truly blame me. After all, he'd raised me for more than 10 years. The bond between us was real. I was his family's treasure too. Even he had never dared treat me like this. So what gave the Carter family the right? Get the kid off the floor already. He's embarrassing himself. George finally couldn't hold back and snapped at me. But his voice was filled with unmistakable concern. I knew he'd forgiven me. I weakly pushed myself up and sat back in the chair. Linda immediately stepped forward, taking my hand and looking me over from head to toe. Terrified she'd missed another injury, Dan's expression softened slightly, though there was still anger in his eyes. Only now, that anger was no longer directed at me. He asked in a low voice, Have you thought about what you're going to do about this? I looked up, my eyes flickering thoughtfully. After thinking for a long moment, I asked, Uncle Thomas, have you gotten any results from the investigation into the Carter family? Hearing my question, Deputy Chief Hayes, who had accompanied my adoptive parents here, answered from the side. The surveillance footage was deleted, but our technical team recovered it. Based on our interviews with everyone in the Carter family except Ethan, and the statements given by the others, we've narrowed down the time the theft could have occurred. Ethan was the only person who entered Victoria's room during that period, and while collecting evidence, we also found evidence on Victoria's vanity and inside her jewelry cabinet, including Ethan's fingerprints and hair. In addition, after questioning the security guard responsible for the surveillance system, we learned that after you called the police, Ethan took several people into the security room, most likely to delete the footage. Deputy Chief Hayes didn't say much, but his explanation made the situation perfectly clear. Aside from my injury assessment, which would take some time, the physical evidence, combined with the servants' matching statements, basically confirmed that Ethan had taken the necklace. At this point, the obstacle standing between Deputy Chief Hayes and his next promotion was the necklace's whereabouts and my attitude. According to the investigation, Ethan probably hadn't disposed of the necklace yet, and hadn't taken it outside the Carter estate. As for where he'd hidden it, all the police needed was a search warrant, and they could search the entire Carter estate from top to bottom. Finding the necklace wouldn't be difficult. The next obstacle was me. Deputy Chief Hayes clearly wanted this opportunity to advance his career, after running around handling everything. At this very moment, the eagerness was practically written all over his face. The one sentence he most wanted to hear from me was, I refuse to settle. As long as I, the victim, refused to settle, he'd have a way to turn this case into the breakthrough he wanted and take a major step forward in his career. What disappointed Deputy Chief Hayes slightly was that I didn't immediately say I refuse to settle. Instead, I asked, has the Carter family requested mediation? Deputy Chief Hayes frowned slightly. The case is still under investigation. The Carter family hasn't formally requested mediation yet. But even if they do, we'll still need your opinion. If you don't agree, no one will force you. I nodded, already calculating how I wanted to deal with the Carter family. Rubbing my chin, I asked, Deputy Chief Hayes, could Ethan's actions qualify as criminal solicitation? And assuming that necklace isn't actually worth more than $10 million, could this qualify as extortion? I silently worked through the possibilities. The Carter family was actually useful to me. The real obstacle standing between me and the Carters was their adopted son. So I might as well use this opportunity to send him to prison. The original owner had been a complete idiot. And since I'd only just transmigrated here, I didn't yet know exactly how this world's legal system differed from the one in my previous life. And besides, in novels like this, the police, prosecutors, and courts were usually strangely powerless. So I might as well use Ethan as my test case. If I could send him away for 3 years, or even longer, then not only would I have 3 years without that adopted brat interfering, while I dealt with the Carter family, I'd also be able to learn how much power this world's police, prosecutors, and courts actually had. With that in mind, I cautiously asked, what if I only pursue Ethan? Deputy Chief Hayes' interest was immediately piqued. He hadn't expected a kid my age to be this calculating. My thinking was almost exactly the same as his. As someone who'd spent years navigating official circles, he knew this operation was meant to send the Carter family a warning, not completely destroy them. And Ethan, the adopted son, was the perfect target. Tyler, that's a very good question. Deputy Chief Hayes considered it for a moment before answering. Ethan's actions. could potentially constitute criminal solicitation and extortion, but that will require further investigation and evidence. Don't worry, we'll enforce the law fairly. We won't let anyone guilty escape responsibility. Of course, I understood exactly what Deputy Chief Hayes was really telling me, so I put on an equally serious expression and said, "Then please make sure the law is enforced fairly. Don't let a single guilty person get away. I definitely won't forgive them, especially anyone who deliberately plotted all of this. That's someone I absolutely refuse to forgive." Inside the mediation room at the Binhai District Public Security Branch, the atmosphere was heavy and tense. The Carter family and I sat on opposite sides of a long table, and a middle-aged man wearing a formal Chinese-style jacket sat between us. At the head of the table, holding a cup of strong tea, Samuel Grant, a 40-year-old legal professional, had been appointed as the mediator for this incident and was responsible for mediating the Carter family dispute. He had already reviewed the case beforehand and now sat between us with a serious expression. After taking a sip of tea, he said, "All right, let's hear your proposed settlement. My position is..." Before I could even finish, Ethan spoke first. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Tyler. I really am." Ethan had originally been sitting quietly between Victoria and Grace, his body leaning slightly forward, as though he didn't even have the strength to sit upright. Anyone watching, all they could see was his pale face and eyes filled with pleading and guilt. Then he lowered his head and covered his face with both hands. Grace immediately stroked his back in distress and comforted him softly. "Ethan, why would you think that? When did your dad and I ever say we'd make you leave? You're the child we love most. Even if we aren't related by blood, how could we ever let you suffer?" "Exactly. You're my only real brother." Victoria stared at me with endless hatred and said, "What is he supposed to be? Just because we share a little blood doesn't mean he could ever compare to you." Robert seemed to get swept up in their emotions too, and turned on me. "You ungrateful brat. If you insist on believing your dad was wrong, then fine. I admit I made mistakes. That was just a moment of anger. I acted without properly investigating and used family punishment on you. But Tyler, what do you have a mouth for? Couldn't you just explain yourself? Did you really have to call the police and let things get this far? You ungrateful brat. What parent doesn't love their own child?" Grace immediately jumped in to support him. "I think you could have slowly become part of our lives. You could have shared the warmth and happiness of this family with us, even if we punished you sometimes. It was only because we hoped you'd correct your bad habits. Even if we misunderstood you, you should have taken it as a warning if you were innocent, and corrected yourself if you weren't. But look at what you've done. As our biological son, you can't even show us the slightest tolerance. And now you've turned everything into this complete disaster." I folded my arms across my chest. Even though I'd already prepared myself for this, I still couldn't help rolling my eyes. "Have you people been brainwashed or something?" I couldn't resist mocking them. "Whatever. I'm not interested in sitting here watching your performance." It had only been an offhand remark, but I immediately noticed that the instant Ethan heard the word brainwashed, his expression froze. An obvious panic flashed across his face. But as someone who'd mastered the art of playing innocent, his acting skills were already nearly flawless. Within seconds, that frozen expression disappeared, and he returned to looking like a fragile, harmless victim, pitiful enough to make anyone feel sorry for him. Could he really have used some kind of goo? My heart stirred. As a veteran cop in my previous life, I'd seen plenty of criminals who were experts at hiding what they felt. That tiny change in Ethan's expression couldn't escape my eyes. Could something like that actually exist? I closed my eyes, and my thoughts raced. Spiritual energy had dried up in this world. Yet even an ancient cultivator teaching through dreams was real. So could things like goo insects exist too? The old cultivator had once mentioned that raising goo insects didn't rely entirely on spiritual energy, but could instead depend on other resources. In an era where spiritual energy had nearly vanished, goo techniques might be among the few mystical arts that could still function. I can try calculating it. I quickly formed a hand seal. Now that I had spiritual energy, I could finally try the divination method the old man had taught me. But the moment I began, my expression turned serious. My cultivation was too weak, and the spiritual energy was too thin. On top of that, this was my first attempt at divination. So the result was extremely blurry. Everything appeared dim and lifeless, except for one faint point of light flickering on and off, according to what the old man had taught me. This result meant the Carter family would eventually be completely destroyed. As for whether Ethan had actually used goo, the answer was yes. But the goo hadn't completely taken control of the Carter family, or turned them into puppets under Ethan's command. I slowly opened my eyes and sneered. So Ethan really does have a few tricks up his sleeve. But ultimately, the people making these decisions were still the biased members of the Carter family themselves. Still, it didn't matter. I continued. Do you people even know where you are? This is the mediation room of the Benhai District Public Security Branch, not the Carter estate. So spare me this touching little performance about how deeply your family loves each other. $50 million, and I'll sign the settlement agreement. I had absolutely no interest in the Carter family's future. Between a family that didn't love me and one that genuinely did, the choice couldn't have been easier. All I wanted now was to squeeze some money out of the Carter family. It was 2018, and this was an interesting point in time. I was also planning to follow the usual path of stories about real and fake heirs, and try starting my own business. The moment the Carters heard my demand, they were completely stunned. Why don't you just rob us? Victoria was more shocked than anyone else. She shot to her feet and accused me. You're demanding $50 million over something like this? I didn't answer. Instead, I gave the mediator a look. It was his turn now. I'd already gone over this with him. Samuel took a sip of tea before calmly speaking. Before we discuss mediation, I'd like to ask you something first, Ms. Carter. Is your necklace really worth $12 million? What does its value have to do with you? Victoria replied coldly. My older sister is a lawyer too. So what if it isn't worth that much? This is a family matter. The necklace belongs to me. I choose to forgive Ethan, and I don't intend to hold him responsible. What can any of you do about it? Samuel smiled. Ms. Carter, under the law, you may choose not to pursue the matter personally, but the police believe this case is serious. The suspect is accused of framing someone, destroying evidence, acting with strong malicious intent, and showing no willingness to turn himself in. During the investigation, the suspect showed no remorse and refused to cooperate. Although the case hasn't been made public, it has already caused a certain degree of social impact. We're currently coordinating with the prosecutor's office regarding prosecution. The value of that necklace is therefore critical. If it really is worth that much, then this case involves theft of property worth an enormous amount. If it isn't, then extortion may also be involved. After saying all of that, Samuel took another sip of tea. The police have their own appraisal department, as well as professional appraisal agencies they regularly work with, so the exact value of the necklace can be determined. But there's a major difference between you personally claiming its value and the police officially appraising it. I picked up where Samuel left off and stared coldly at Ethan. Ethan, you don't need to keep acting. Nothing you say here will change the facts. The police rely on physical evidence, as well as witness statements. Your performance is useless, as for the rest of you. Mr. Robert Carter is currently suspected of assault and abuse. Mrs. Grace Carter is suspected of unlawful detention. And Ethan's situation is far more serious. The police already recovered the deleted surveillance footage and confirmed that you entered Victoria's room. Inside Victoria's jewelry cabinet, on her vanity, wardrobe, and bed, they recovered your fingerprints and hair. They even recovered biological material belonging to you from tissue paper in her trash can. Let me give all of you a quick lesson in the law. I continued. Mr. Robert Carter, under Article 234 of the criminal law, anyone who intentionally causes bodily injury to another person may be sentenced to up to 3 years in prison, criminal detention, or public surveillance. My injury assessment hasn't been completed yet, but if I refuse to sign a settlement agreement, you're definitely going to spend some time behind bars. Mrs. Grace Carter. There's also video evidence showing you locking me in the basement. Under Article 238 of the criminal law, you may face up to 3 years in prison, criminal detention, public surveillance, or deprivation of political rights. As for the exact sentence, that's up to the court. Ms. Victoria Carter, your situation is a little different. If the necklace you reported missing really is worth that much, the police currently see two possibilities. Either you truly knew nothing about Ethan's plan, or you were part of it. If you genuinely knew nothing, then you won't be held responsible. But if you can't provide a reasonable explanation for suddenly forgiving Ethan, then the police may consider whether you were involved. And if your necklace isn't actually worth what you claimed, then you and Ethan may be suspected of conspiring to commit extortion. As for you, Ethan, I stared directly at him, my voice turning ice cold. Your role in this case is the most serious. First, you entered a residence to steal property worth an enormous amount. Second, you committed an indecent act inside someone else's private room. Third, you framed another person and damaged his reputation. Fourth, don't think the things you said were just words. Your statements may already constitute criminal incitement, and they directly led Robert and Grace to assault and unlawfully detain me. So once all those offenses are considered together, even if I sign a settlement agreement, you're still looking at least 3 years. Mr. Robert Carter, you're a businessman and the richest man in Shanghai. Even if I refuse to sign the settlement, you may still have ways to get yourself out. But from the moment you're taken inside until the moment you get back out, have you thought about how long you'll be detained and how much money you'll lose? For a moment, the expressions of all four Carters changed dramatically. Inside the mediation room at the Binhai District Public Security Branch, the air seemed to freeze. I watched the Carter family's expressions shift and sneered inwardly. These people were supposed to be shrewd businessmen. Yet somehow they radiated stupidity. No wonder people said wealth rarely survives 3 generations. The current head of the Carter family wasn't even as capable as a street vendor in my eyes. He had none of the composure of a major businessman, and none of the cunning of a small-time hustler. He was an absolute joke. 50 million? Why don't you just rob us? Robert finally couldn't hold back, his expression turning ugly. I couldn't be bothered arguing with him. I simply gave the mediator a calm glance, then folded my arms and closed my eyes to rest. Samuel cleared his throat and set down his teacup. His tone remained calm. Mr. Carter, 50 million may sound like a lot, but compared to the damage this incident could do to your corporation, it's really not much. Only after signing the settlement agreement can you get out quickly enough to handle the public relations fallout. Then what about our son? Grace's face went pale, and her voice trembled. I let out a cold laugh and cut her off. Your best option is for the two of you to get out first and contain the public backlash as quickly as possible. As for Ethan, he should go to prison and serve his time. If he behaves well, he might even get his sentence reduced. And for Victoria, you can try arranging medical parole. That's your only way out. Victoria shot to her feet, pointed straight at me, and screamed. You ungrateful bastard. I didn't react. I simply stared coldly at her, without the slightest ripple of emotion in my eyes. The Carter family has treated you well, and this is how you repay us? Ding, as Victoria's voice was shrill, her eyes burning with rage. I stared back at her coldly, my gaze like ice, without the slightest emotion. You've treated me well, Ms. Carter? In 3 days at your house, I got 1 full meal. Spent 2 nights sleeping in a basement, got whipped half to death, and was somehow accused of being a thief? Victoria's expression instantly froze. Then her face flushed bright red. Her lips trembled slightly, but she couldn't say another word. Samuel chuckled softly, breaking the brief. Silence. He patted the mediation agreement and settlement documents. That had already been prepared, his tone calm but firm. Mr. Carter, Ms. Carter, what Tyler said is factual. Based on the evidence currently in our possession, Ethan's actions may constitute multiple criminal offenses, including burglary, indecent conduct, framing another person, and more. These are not simple family disputes. They are serious criminal matters. This isn't merely about whether someone chooses to forgive him. The public security authorities are already preparing to pursue charges against Ethan. Through the prosecution process, I shook my head, watching the family continue to struggle against reality, and sighed inwardly. I glanced at my phone, then spoke in a calm voice carrying a clear warning. Mr. Carter, the mainland doesn't work the same way as overseas. Don't sit there wondering why you've spent so much money, building relationships with so many people. yet still can't make a little problem like this disappear. Because people inside the system and businessmen outside it don't always have the same goals or interests. On the mainland, there are plenty of ways to turn power into money, but trying to turn money back into power is much harder and carries enormous risk. Come to think of it, I remember Grandpa Carter sent you abroad when you were very young, and you spent years in the U.S. So let me give you one piece of advice. Don't bring American rules of the game back to the mainland. With that, I stood and straightened my clothes. My voice remained calm but left no room for argument. It's 14 in the morning. There are still more than 6 hours before offices open at 8003 So I'll say this one last time. You're a businessman. Signing now and cutting your losses is what you should be doing. Once you miss the best window, both you and Shingrachong Group will lose far more than 50 million. I lightly waved my phone with a faint threat in my voice. And one more thing. Don't think you can walk out of here and refuse to pay. I've saved every video and recording. These things might not cripple you or Shingrachong Group, but they'll become a thorn in your side and make your lives miserable, especially those entertainment companies under your group. Businesses like that depend heavily on public perception and online traffic, don't they? After saying that, I turned toward Samuel and spoke casually. Uncle Samuel, thanks for the trouble. Samuel didn't answer and only smiled faintly before lifting his cup and taking another sip of tea. Then he watched me leave. As the mediator, he naturally understood. Plenty of people outside that were eagerly hoping the mediation would fail. After all, when one giant tree falls, countless things beneath it can flourish. Now it all depended on whether Mr. Carter really understood when to cut his losses. Outside the Binhai District Public Security Branch, the night was pitch black, and the streetlights cast a dim yellow glow. I stepped out of the mediation room and immediately saw my adoptive parents waiting anxiously outside. Tyler, how did it go? Did everything get resolved? Linda tightly held my hand, her eyes filled with concern. I smiled faintly, with a trace of confidence hidden beneath it. Mom, don't worry. It's basically handled. The Carter family is willing to pay $50 million to settle everything. George's eyebrows rose slightly, and disbelief flashed through his eyes. $50 million? That's a huge amount of money. The Carter family is really willing to bleed for this. They don't have a choice. Otherwise, they'll lose even more. My tone was calm, with the composure of someone who already had everything under control. After a brief pause, I asked, Dad, how is the former head of the Carter family, Charles Carter, doing health-wise? George thought for a moment, then replied, pretty well. Did you forget that just last week there was news about that old man taking an 18-year-old girlfriend to a prenatal checkup? I froze when I heard that, and the news report from last week immediately flashed through my mind. I frowned slightly and asked in confusion, wasn't she supposed to be his oldest granddaughter? I remember Shingrachong even issued a statement saying old Mr. Carter was accompanying his granddaughter to a prenatal exam because he wanted to see his future great-grandchild. Who knows? George shook his head, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. The world of rich people is complicated. Just because you saw an official denial doesn't mean it was true. Who can really tell what's real and what's fake? Get in the car. As George spoke, he handed me a document. This is your injury assessment. Deputy Chief Hayes brought it to me. He said they rushed it and got the result out early. I took the document, gave it a casual glance, then tossed it aside, and closed my eyes to rest. I understood perfectly well that Deputy Chief Hayes was indirectly reminding me to consider whether demanding such a large settlement was reasonable. The car started and slowly pulled away from the branch station. On the way, Linda still looked worried and said anxiously, Tyler, I know you're the victim here, and it's your decision how to handle this. But $50 million, that's not a small amount of money. I opened my eyes and glanced at Mom, then closed them again. My voice was calm but firm. I'm not asking for compensation. This is the price the Carter family is paying to suppress a scandal. Robert might not know how to calculate the cost, but someone in the Carter family certainly does. We won't even have to wait until tomorrow morning. My guess is that by 4 or 5, the first payment will already hit the account. I paused, then continued. Once I receive the $50 million, I plan to give $20 million of it to you and Dad. And I'll use the remaining 30 million to try starting a small business. George was about to refuse, but I cut him off. Dad, don't worry about me. Then I closed my eyes again and said tiredly, I want to rest for a while. If you really want to talk about it, at least let me recover a little first. Seeing how exhausted I looked, the old couple stopped talking and simply sat quietly in the car, both worried and hopeful. I sat in the back seat with my eyes closed. But even while resting, I was planning my future. I knew perfectly well that whether I wanted to cultivate immortality or survive in modern society, resources came first. Cultivation required pills, treasures, and spiritual resources, while modern life required massive amounts of capital. That 50 million would become the first foundation stone for my path of cultivation. But investing was never easy. One wrong move could wipe out everything. I carefully searched through the memories of my previous life, trying to find the right investment opportunity. It was 2018. The global economy was recovering, but protectionism and unilateralism were on the rise, and the international situation was growing increasingly complicated. The U.S.-China trade war was about to begin. That meant both danger and opportunity. I thought about new energy, drones, artificial intelligence, and other high-tech industries. But all of those fields required enormous amounts of capital and resources. 30 million was nowhere near enough. The medical industry might be an option, but whether the future pandemic would even happen in this world was still unknown. I slowly opened my eyes and looked out the car window, sighing inwardly. Was there really no opportunity where I could get in early? Just then, a Wuling minivan roared past us. My eyes sharpened, and I murmured, Wuling, Howling, the company that makes whatever ordinary people need. The next second, it was as if lightning struck my mind. Everything suddenly became clear. I carefully studied the streets, trying to spot differences from my previous life. Then, suddenly, a heavily modified motorcycle screamed past us, its piercing engine noise shattering the quiet night. My eyes lit up. I finally realized what was missing: electric scooters. At this point in my previous life, electric scooters were already everywhere. Delivery riders and designated drivers used them constantly, weaving through cities day and night. But, on the streets of this world, electric scooters were surprisingly rare. Instead, motorcycles and bicycles were everywhere. Could this be the opportunity I've been looking for? I thought quietly. If I entered the market early, the electric scooter industry could explode over the next few years. The trade war, rising fuel prices, and government support for new energy and green transportation would all become major forces driving the industry's growth. More importantly, I could use Dad's connections and work with national policy to help push motorcycle restrictions forward. The initial investment required for electric scooters was relatively low. This world already had an electric vehicle industry, and new energy automakers like BYD were already rising. Shanghai itself also had local EV brands and supporting industries. Capital, industry support, and policy were all in place. All I needed was solid market research, and I'd have plenty of room to expand later. While I was still planning out the future, the car slowly entered our neighborhood. Suddenly, my phone chimed. I casually glanced at it and saw a notification from ICBC. When I opened it, my pupils contracted slightly. 30 million had just been deposited. The Carter family's response was much faster than I'd expected. I'd thought I'd have to wait until deep into the night before seeing what decision they made. After all, Robert didn't exactly look brilliant, and power struggles inside a wealthy family usually took time, yet we'd barely reached the entrance to the neighborhood, and 30 million was already in my account. The corner of my mouth lifted slightly, and I sneered inwardly. Looks like not everyone in the Carter family is an idiot. I put my phone away, my gaze becoming firm. This money was the key that would open the next chapter of my life. I narrowed my eyes and looked through the window as the car slowly entered Green Bamboo Residential Community. This was the old neighborhood where my adoptive parents lived. Most of the buildings were over 30 years old and only a few stories high. The streetlights had been modernized, but the neighborhood still carried traces of the 1970s and 1980s. Simple signs hung from old brick walls, quietly showing the passage of time. Green Bamboo might have been old, but it was one of the safest neighborhoods in all of Shanghai, even safer than the wealthy villa districts. It had originally been built as government housing, for employees of various municipal departments. Police officers, prosecutors, judges, municipal officials, tax employees, and other government workers had all lived here, even though the residents were much more mixed now. It was still filled with people connected to the government system. Committing a crime here was practically the same as turning yourself in. The car stopped in an out-of-the-way spot, and George led us up to the 6th floor. The stairwell lights were dim and yellow, casting shadows over walls marked by decades of wear. The moment we reached the 6th floor hallway, an unexpected figure appeared in front of us. A short, elderly man in a formal Chinese-style jacket sat there with a cane, quietly waiting outside George's apartment. George froze for a moment. The old man looked strangely familiar, but he couldn't remember his name. He was about to walk over and ask, when I gently tugged on my adoptive dad's sleeve and reminded him, "Dad, go inside first. I'll talk to the old gentleman for a while." George looked at me and immediately understood. Then he nodded and took Linda inside. Only after the door closed did I walk over. I almost called the old man an old bastard, but stopped myself at the last second. The old man opened his eyes and pushed himself upright with his cane. I obediently stepped forward to support him. Neither of us said a word as we went downstairs. Only after leaving the neighborhood did the old man let out a long sigh. "You still have some consideration." I thought after what that worthless son of mine did, you'd hate this old man along with him. I smiled faintly, my tone polite but distant. One thing is one thing, even when blood ties are involved. I won't blame the dad for the son's crimes. Otherwise, how would I be any different from Mr. Carter, who can't tell right from wrong or understand the situation he's in? It was already late at night, but the moment I'd gotten a clear look at the old man's face, I'd recognized him as Robert's dad, Charles Carter. Whether it was the resemblance between father and son, or the photos from all those tabloid stories, his face was impossible to forget. Charles smiled. "Tyler, what happened this time was my worthless son's fault. Would you be willing to forgive him?" Exactly as I'd expected. That 30 million hadn't arrived so quickly for no reason. I calmly recalled what had happened at the branch station, where there was already a settlement agreement I'd signed. I didn't directly answer the old man's question. Instead, I replied in a formal, distant tone. Charles understood what I meant, and sighed. His voice weakened slightly. "There's really no possibility at all? What do you think?" I spread my hands, although my clothes covered most of my injuries. The wounds on my arms, neck, and legs were still clearly visible. Under the streetlights, Charles's eyes shimmered with tears. He opened his mouth several times but couldn't get the words out. Then, I raised my phone and said, "I have a few questions. Answer them for me, and transfer another 30 million. I guarantee I'll delete every video, and won't give any independent interviews to the media. If necessary, I can even coordinate with you in advance, to minimize the damage. I'm not some reckless idiot who charges in swinging at everyone without thinking. And I'm not some reborn protagonist obsessed with revenge. I'm just an ordinary person. And as long as my interests are maximized, I'm willing to give you a graceful way out." Charles sighed again, as though he'd already guessed what I wanted to ask, and answered directly. "Actually, Ethan's background is much more complicated than you think. Years ago, I traveled overseas and stayed at a beachfront hotel in the Caribbean, where I unexpectedly ran into my first love, who had been 18 when we first met. She was single at the time, and I'd just been forced into a marriage with a woman I didn't love. So you have to understand, once we met again, things quickly got out of control. Even if it was only temporary, we wanted to enjoy that passion again, but neither of us expected her to become pregnant. At the time, I'd only just taken over the family business, and I couldn't afford to remain overseas. I didn't even know she was pregnant. So I left her some money and my contact information, then returned home. Later, she gave birth overseas to Ethan's biological father, Connor, and raised him alone. Connor went through a lot growing up abroad. He married, then later divorced, and eventually had a son, Ethan, by pure chance. I eventually learned Ethan existed. By then, my first love had already passed away. So I brought him back to China. But at the time, your dad already had his own family, and there was no way I could publicly acknowledge Ethan's father. So I secretly arranged for him to live in Shanghai, and never revealed his existence to the public. I didn't even tell your dad, but that child had a hard life. He barely got to enjoy a year of stability before he passed away following his mother. After that, Ethan was left all alone. I immediately guessed where the story was going next. Let me guess. That was around the time I went missing. Mom was crying every day, and Dad was devastated. And, conveniently, Ethan was about the same age as me. So you arranged an adoption and brought Ethan into the Carter family? Charles looked surprised, but he didn't deny it. What about me? I asked next. Don't tell me the Carter family used every resource it had, searched for more than 10 years, and still couldn't find me, while somehow running a missing child search for over a decade, with the reward increasing year after year. The original owner realized when he was little that he looked like Robert Carter. He went to the Carter estate several times, but every single time the security guards chased him away. The last time, they even released a dog on him and nearly got him bitten. If he hadn't happened to run into the family at his 18th birthday banquet, with no way to avoid them, none of the later recognition would have happened. So tell me, old man, how do you explain not finding me for more than 10 years? Charles fell silent for a moment, his gaze shifting toward a light that had just turned on upstairs. Only after a long while did he ask, Tyler, are you planning to take the civil service exam? I thought for a moment and immediately understood what he meant. With my adoptive dad's connections, as long as I passed the written exam, even barely scraping through would probably be enough to get me in. Add the Carter family's money and the Miller family's network, and my promotion speed could be rocket fast. Considering the original owner's personality, all the Carter family would need was to manufacture a few chance encounters, offer him a little family warmth and a few favors, and the Carter family could gain a backer in Jinghai whose value couldn't be measured in money. Even if the original owner didn't remain local, his position and connections could still be used to make the Carter family's business dealings elsewhere more convenient. The combination of influence inside the system and capital outside it during a period of complicated international conditions and national economic transformation would mean that even if the Carter family achieved nothing spectacular, they could still remain almost impossible to shake. Unfortunately, plans never survive reality. A cold smile curled across my lips. As for Ethan and Robert, those two idiots, they were completely beyond saving. Plans really couldn't keep up with fate. A flash of anger crossed Charles's eyes, but there was even more helplessness there. He sighed. Yeah, they were too stupid. These past 6 months, I was supposed to be staying with my eldest granddaughter, waiting for the birth of my first great-grandchild. I never expected something like this to happen. My early return had been outside Charles's original plan, but since we'd already met, and there was a paternity test, plus the fact that I had personally asked to return to the family, Charles hadn't thought too much about it. He figured earlier was earlier, as long as they treated me well, and treated my adoptive parents well, so that the family bond didn't completely break. They could still find a way later to push me toward the civil service exam, and the plan could continue. But who would have imagined that in only 3 days, those two idiots would completely destroy a plan he'd spent more than 10 years preparing, with their own hands, from the moment he received the news until now. Charles had spent half the day trying to understand what Robert and Grace had even been thinking. Even if they couldn't see through his plan, I was still their biological son, their own flesh and blood, carried by Grace for 10 months. At first, he hadn't believed it, until a friend in public security called him and confirmed everything was true. He'd been so furious he nearly ended up in the hospital. Everything was ruined. Idiots. Complete idiots, Charles slammed his cane down and cursed. Those useless animals should rot in prison and never come out. 50 million. I'll transfer it to you right now. Go tear up that settlement agreement. I want those two idiots to spend the rest of their lives in prison. The rest of their lives? I curled my lip. Come on. If they really stay in prison forever, who's going to inherit the Carter family? Don't tell me you're planning to hand it to a great-grandchild, or that you have some secret illegitimate son or grandson somewhere. Charles didn't answer. His gaze settled on me. Even though the original plan had changed, if there was someone intelligent enough to preserve the family business, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Forget it, I waved my hand. I'm not interested. in taking over that giant mess of yours. You can deal with it yourself. I finally escaped the real heir versus fake heir plot. Why would I willingly jump back in? And judging by the usual rules of this kind of story, Shingrichong Group is probably full of parasites right now, and most of them can't even be removed easily, without memories from a previous life in the company. I don't know who's loyal, who should be fired, or who has dirt I can use. Besides, I was only a low-level cop in my previous life. I've never managed a corporation that big. Throwing me into it wouldn't accomplish anything. This isn't some novel where I walk in and immediately launch sweeping reforms and turn the whole company around overnight. My best option is to build my own company from scratch. If I go take over Shingrichong now, I'll only be walking into a dead end. Old Master Carter, I spoke calmly. I've walked you far enough. I should head back. As for whether I sign a settlement agreement, if you don't want me to, then transfer another $50 million like you just said. If you do want me to sign, send the remaining $20 million. Take care. I won't see you off the next morning. Sunlight slit through the gap in the curtains and fell across my face. I rubbed my sleepy eyes, picked up my phone, and saw that $30 million had been deposited into my account, bringing the total to $60 million. The number was subtle enough to make me raise an eyebrow. Looks like old Master Carter wanted me to compromise, but wasn't willing to completely give in either. Still, Ethan probably wouldn't be detained for very long. A fake heir, an illegitimate bloodline, and a legitimate eldest grandson clashing head-on. I sneered and didn't care. Whatever happened to Ethan had nothing to do with me. As long as I stayed away from the Carter family, everything would be over. Now I was going to use this $60 million to start my own electric motorcycle business. After washing up, I told my adoptive parents I wanted to go look at motorcycles, then threw on a casual jacket and headed out. I didn't mention the startup yet. Instead, I began my investigation. Electric motorcycles had become popular in my previous life because they were cheap to operate, convenient and efficient for everyday transportation. But in this world, they were extremely rare. The external conditions weren't much different from my previous life. So if the industry couldn't develop, the reason had to be internal. Before long, I arrived at a specialty store in the high-tech district called Flash E-Mobility. The store wasn't large, but it displayed a wide variety of electric motorcycles, from simple and stylish designs to futuristic high-tech models. They had practically everything. The moment I walked in, a salesperson immediately came over enthusiastically. "Sir, are you interested in electric motorcycles? We have the newest models here, and their performance is excellent." I smiled and nodded. The salesperson immediately began introducing one. "This is our flagship electric motorcycle. It comes equipped with our latest smart system, including voice control, automatic navigation, cruise control, lane monitoring, self-balancing, and several other features." As I listened to the salesperson, my confusion gradually grew. The electric motorcycles here seemed way too intelligent. Even in my previous life, they hadn't reached anything close to this level. I couldn't help interrupting the salesperson and asking the question I cared about most. "How much does this model cost?" The salesperson smiled slightly. $80,000. $7,000 down. With monthly payments as low as $3,000. I nearly choked. That was already enough money to buy a decent regular motorcycle. I shook my head. "That's a little expensive. Do you have anything cheaper?" The salesperson looked slightly disappointed. "Then you'd have to look at used models. But as you know, used ones have very limited range. This is actually already our cheapest new model. And we'll install a charging station for you free of charge." The moment I heard the words charging station, I frowned slightly and muttered under my breath, "This thing needs its own dedicated charging station?" The salesperson nodded as though it were obvious. "Of course, if you install one yourself, the cost is extremely high, and it's really not worth it." Realization suddenly hit me. I finally understood why electric motorcycles were so rare in this world. These things were clearly being designed to compete directly with electric cars. They were expensive, inconvenient to charge, and had limited range. Who would buy something like that? Now that I had $60 million in capital, I wasn't here just to look at electric motorcycles. I had 3 objectives today. First, Investigate market prices and specifications for electric motorcycles through test rides, so I could develop a basic understanding of this world's electric scooters. Second, I needed to rent a warehouse that could eventually be used to store electric scooters and serve as a base for the R&D team, where we could carry out reverse engineering. Third, I needed to build a team and start replicating mature products already on the market. I didn't think there was anything shameful about copying. In my view, studying and learning from existing products was a necessary stage in the growth of any company, even companies that constantly talked about innovation and intellectual property usually had plenty of copying buried somewhere in their history. I was a realist. I had no intention of blindly chasing innovation from scratch. Copy hard, then surpass them even harder. That was my strategy. Meanwhile, Robert and Grace returned to the villa in a miserable state, their eyes bloodshot, with none of the composure of a wealthy chairman and his elegant wife left. The moment they reached the estate entrance, they sensed something was wrong. Normally, the butler and maids would already be waiting at the door, but tonight, the place was completely silent. The gate stood open. Robert called out several times, "Frank," but no one answered. Grace's voice trembled nervously. "Honey, maybe we should call the police first." Robert frowned deeply, his expression dark. He had only just gotten out of the police station, and his resentment toward the police hadn't faded. There was no way he was going to call them voluntarily. He said coldly, "No, I refuse to believe anyone would dare break into the Carter estate." He pushed the door open, ready to lose his temper, but immediately froze. The people standing inside weren't maids, but two massive men in sharp suits. They were Charles Carter's personal bodyguards. "Young master, madam, please," one of them spoke without expression. His tone was icy, and he didn't move an inch. There was nothing remotely inviting about the gesture. Robert's heart sank. He followed the bodyguards through the living room. The chaos from the previous night hadn't been cleaned up at all, as though silently reminding him of how badly things had gone. The bodyguards led the couple upstairs to the study. Under the dim lighting, Charles sat behind the desk, holding a thick report in his hand. Stacks of documents covered the desk. Some new, some old. Robert carefully sat down beside the couch, trying to keep his voice calm. "Dad, you wanted to see me?" Charles looked up. His gaze was deep, almost as though he could see straight through people. He let out a soft sigh, filled with disappointment, helplessness, and something even heavier. "Robert, did you read the group's internal affairs report for the second quarter?" Charles asked. He handed the report to Robert, his tone perfectly calm, yet the pressure behind it felt like an invisible mountain, crushing the air from Robert's lungs. Robert accepted the report, his fingers trembling slightly. One report every quarter. It was a rule Charles had established when he still ran the family. The report covered finances, department progress, and other internal matters. It summarized the company's previous quarter and planned the next one. Robert had read countless reports like it, but today, this one felt impossibly heavy. He opened the first page. Dense numbers and charts seemed almost painfully sharp, making him afraid to look directly at them. But he forced himself to read line by line. With every page he turned, the weight in his chest grew heavier. "Do you remember the water park project you invested in back in 2013 in Chongshan District? It was supposed to be completed in 2 years, but this year it officially became an abandoned project. The group lost nearly $2 billion. Charles's voice remained perfectly calm, but Robert's hands shook, and he nearly dropped the report. "Dad, that was because during the first phase of construction, we discovered a Han Dynasty tomb underneath the site. I was worried it would delay the project. So Robert's voice trembled, but Charles cut him off before he could finish. "I know," Charles said calmly. "If I hadn't happened to visit the site myself, things would have turned out even worse. But do you even know where you're standing now?" Robert opened his mouth, but couldn't force out a single word. And then, there was the smartphone company you insisted on acquiring last year. Because you said you wanted to become Shanghai's Steve Jobs. Charles's tone remained calm, but every word landed like a hammer, pounding against Robert's chest. What was the first phone that company released? Sweat poured down Robert's face. His legs went weak, and he dropped directly to his knees, his whole body shaking uncontrollably. Charles rose with the support of his cane. and tapped the documents on the desk. He shook his head. Didn't Ethan study medicine? Arrange for him to go to Hani Hospital. Have his third sister look after him. This old man doesn't have much dignity left to lose. Charles walked past Robert's kneeling figure, his voice low. 60 million. Imagine what you could have accomplished if you'd put that money into business. Do you think an old man like me can buy back my youth with it? Meanwhile, I was busy running around the market for an entire day. From morning until night, I visited almost every electric scooter shop in Shanghai. The small notebook in my hand was packed with, and 2 open information about electric scooters from every store. The last one. I tilted my head back and finished a canned drink, then looked at the sign in front of me. Brandt Motorcycles. It was a European brand in this world, a century-old company, built on craftsmanship and focused exclusively on motorcycles. That dedication had made it one of the top names in the motorcycle industry and a dream brand for countless riders. I walked inside. The interior was upscale and elegant, with the atmosphere of old European nobility. Every salesperson, male or female, looked polished and attractive. A young woman approached me, wearing a practiced professional smile, and asked gently, "Hey there, is this your first time visiting our store? What kind of motorcycle are you interested in?" he asked with a smile. "Electric scooters," I answered simply, while scanning the vehicles on display. Her eyes lit up. "Do you already have a model in mind? Or would you like me to introduce them for you?" "All of them." I opened my notebook and prepared to take notes. Although she looked a little confused, the thought of the high commission on electric scooters immediately energized her, and she began enthusiastically pitching them. "This is one of our newest models. It has excellent range and premium specifications." I listened while rapidly taking notes, carefully recording the details of every electric scooter. Just as I became absorbed in the work, a familiar figure entered my line of sight. It was Ryan Mitchell, the guy the Carter family had called a street punk. But the Ryan standing in front of me looked nothing like the cheerful teenager in my memories. It had only been 1 month since the college entrance exam ended. How had he already become like this? Ryan had always ranked near the bottom of our class, but when it came to fighting, he was an expert. He'd even made friends with some so-called people from the streets. If the school and his parents hadn't kept him under control, he probably would have become a real delinquent long ago. Still, Ryan wasn't without good qualities. He was fiercely loyal, and because his dad and my adoptive dad had once served together, he had voluntarily protected me throughout all 3 years of high school. Whenever anyone bullied me, Ryan would step in without hesitation, even if it meant ambushing them later with a sack over their heads. But the Ryan standing before me now felt unfamiliar, and it worried me. I rubbed my temple, then told the salesperson, "Give me one of every electric scooter in your store. I'll send you an address in a few days. Just deliver them there." A flash of surprise and excitement appeared in her eyes, and she hurried off to prepare the paperwork. I straightened my clothes, then walked toward Ryan with firm steps. Naturally, Ryan had already seen me too. He'd assumed that after we ran into each other, I'd thank him for saving me, and maybe even buy him a Brandt motorcycle. But the first thing out of my mouth left him stunned. Cool. The Ryan Mitchell I know doesn't look like this. I frowned and sighed. I heard from Uncle Michael that you can only get into a vocational college. Are you really planning to spend the rest of your life drifting around like this? Ryan fell silent for a moment, before embarrassment turned into anger. He never would have expected that I'd start lecturing him the moment we met. Then I threw an arm around Ryan's shoulders and forcefully smothered his anger before it could explode. "Come on. You want one of the motorcycles here, don't you? Ryan, I know you love motorcycles. Every bike in this place is top tier." I smiled at him, my tone carrying a teasing edge. Ryan's eyes immediately lit up. He knew. I'd gotten $50 million in compensation from the Carter family. $50 million. Buying a motorcycle with that was nothing. But I shook my head and laughed. "I'm not buying one for you. But I do know a way for you to afford one yourself." Ryan instantly got angry and shoved my arm away, lowering his voice. "If you don't want to help, just say it. Don't stand there acting like some big shot. It's not like I need your charity anyway." I wasn't offended. Instead, I looked at him with an amused smile. "Oh, mighty Godfather, I'm doing this for your own good. Have you forgotten about your old man? Chi. Ryan snorted. You think I'm stupid? You think I can't just pressure my old man into buying me one? That made me laugh. I tapped the limited edition collaboration motorcycle beside us and grinned. How about we make a bet? What kind of bet? Ryan frowned, looking at me suspiciously. I calmly pointed at the bike. You want this one? I remember you telling me about it. It's a global limited edition. Only 40 were made. It was designed by Brandt's 6th generation head, in collaboration with legendary motorcycle designer Branya. Kill. It even has signatures from Brand the Sixth and Branya's artisan team right on the body. You want it? Then take my bet. If you win, the bike is yours. At that moment, the salesperson returned carrying the contract and keys, and respectfully walked over. My voice became almost devilishly tempting. The bet is simple. And PM, let's see how long you can keep this motorcycle. I bet by tomorrow morning, your dad will personally drag you back here to return it. Ryan's eyes widened, and he stared at me in disbelief. You're betting my dad will drag me back here tomorrow morning? You've got to be kidding. I looked completely serious. If you take the bet, you can ride this bike out of here right now. So, you scared? Ryan froze, staring at the smug smile on my face. Anger surged inside him. But more than that, he felt provoked. He gritted his teeth. Fine, you're on. You think I'm afraid of you? But what if you lose? I smiled. If I lose, I'll buy you a motorcycle even better than this one. So, still want to bet? A trace of hesitation flashed through Ryan's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by stubborn defiance. He clenched his jaw. Fine, I'll take the bet. Tomorrow morning, you'll see me riding this bike right back here. I smiled to myself. Ryan Mitchell. If you can actually hide this from that old man of yours, I'll take your last name. That evening on the 6th floor of Unit 6, Building 6 in Green Bamboo Residential Community, inside apartment 666, the lights were bright. The three of us sat around the dining table, and the atmosphere felt slightly awkward. So, how'd it go? Tyler, did you find a motorcycle you liked? George asked while mechanically picking at the food in his bowl, trying to break the heavy silence with a casual tone, but concern was obvious in his eyes. He didn't approve of buying a motorcycle, but it was his son's decision, so he didn't want to stop me outright. He knew boys my age naturally liked motorcycles, and now that I had money, wanting to buy one to fulfill a youthful dream wasn't exactly unreasonable. Still, George eventually put down his chopsticks and said seriously, Tyler, I know how you spend that compensation money. Is your choice. But motorcycles are too dangerous. There's nothing protecting you. So I still don't recommend buying one. Linda agreed with him, while gently serving me a bowl of soup. Tyler, motorcycles really are dangerous. If you're only buying one because it looks cool, your dad and I don't think it's worth the risk. I took a bite of my steamed bun and smiled, with a hint of mystery and confidence. Actually, I spent today doing market research. As I spoke, I pulled a small notebook from my bag and placed it seriously on the table. Take a look. This is what I collected today. George and Linda exchanged glances, both looking surprised. They hadn't expected me to research it this seriously. Instead of acting on impulse, George flipped through the notebook, his brows knitting tighter, as if he were searching for some obvious flaw, but couldn't find one. The only thing that confused him was why every model I'd researched was electric. Those things are just flashy toys with no real use. George frowned, his tone clearly dismissive. I set down my bowl and chopsticks, then continued seriously. Actually, I'm planning to invest $15 million into producing electric motorcycles. As I ate, I enthusiastically explained my grand plan. Dad, Mom, tomorrow I'm going to the bank and transfer $10 million into each of your accounts. If you're willing, I'd like each of you to invest $200,000 back into my project as seed capital. And Mom, don't you work at Shanghai University of Technology? Do you know anyone in mechanical design, electrical automation, vehicle engineering, or industrial design? I want to build a professional team. After hearing me out, George and Linda both looked stunned. $15 million was an astronomical amount for an ordinary family like ours, almost beyond imagination, and investing it in electric motorcycles seemed incredibly risky. George's hand trembled slightly. as though he couldn't believe what he'd heard. "Son, how did you come up with something this reckless?" I could see how worried they were. So I continued, "Based on the market research I did today, combined with what I've already learned and observed, I believe electric motorcycles have tremendous advantages and potential. The reason they're struggling right now is because the design philosophy has gone in the wrong direction and wiped out most of their natural advantages. I believe that if we can identify those problems and fix them, we can completely open up the market." The more I talked, the more excited I became, as though I could already see my future success unfolding in front of me. I even stood up and started gesturing enthusiastically, my eyes shining with endless anticipation for the future. But George's expression grew darker the longer he listened, like the eerie calm before a storm, ready to erupt at any second. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and slammed his bowl down on the table. "You get a little money and immediately want to throw it away. Electric motorcycles? Do you even know how many manufacturers have entered this industry? Since electric motorcycles were included in national green transport subsidies in 2008? Do you? And look at where the industry is now. Do you have any idea how fierce the competition is? How high the risk is? Who gave you the confidence to think some inexperienced kid like you can succeed?" His voice trembled slightly with anger, and disappointment and worry filled his eyes. In his mind, I'd clearly gotten carried away the moment I had money. The government had invested so much and still hadn't managed to make electric motorcycles truly take off. So where did I get the confidence to think I could? Linda immediately set down her own bowl and chopsticks with a sharp clack, her voice filled with displeasure. "Why are you talking to him like that? I know you're worried about our son. But what kind of attitude is this? Tyler having his own ideas is a good thing. We should encourage him, not crush him every time he tries something. He's already grown up. He's capable of making his own judgments and decisions." She paused before continuing. "You stubborn old man. I told you last night, you've always been too hard on him and put too much pressure on him. If the Carter family hadn't treated him like garbage, our son might never have come back to us." George didn't budge at all. He said coldly, "Naive. Way too naive. If this could work, someone would have already made it work. I don't want your money. Keep it for yourself. If you really want to invest, at least don't put it into an industry that's obviously dying. The government has already announced that subsidies for electric motorcycles will be canceled in 2020. Looking at my parents, warmth spread through my chest. This stubborn old man. Still, I personally witnessed how huge the electric motorcycle industry would eventually become. And I firmly believed my choice was right. I smiled, my expression full of confidence and determination. "Dad, Mom, you don't need to worry. I already did the market research today. Later, I'll use my findings and the current policies to write a feasibility report. You can read it before making your decision. Even if you write a feasibility report, I still won't agree," George answered without hesitation. "This industry is too complicated, and the risks are too high. I don't want you ruining your future over this. You'd be better off buying a house with that money, or investing in some other stable business." I didn't argue anymore. I simply nodded silently, though defiance still burned in my eyes. I looked firmly at my parents. "Mom, I believe in the future of electric motorcycles. This could become a market worth tens of billions, hundreds of billions, even trillions. The only reason electric motorcycles are failing right now is because the industry took the wrong path. I believe I can find the right one and make electric motorcycles people's first choice for everyday transportation." There was no hesitation in my voice, as if I could already see the future glory of the electric motorcycle industry unfolding before me. "Whether you agree or not, I'm doing this. Even if you both oppose it, I'm still doing it. I'll be happy if you support me. But opposing me won't change anything. I've already made up my mind. I don't need government subsidies, and you don't have to worry about me scamming subsidy money." George's face turned livid with anger, and his fingers trembled slightly. He clearly wanted to pull off his belt and teach me a lesson. But I was already grown, and hitting or yelling at me wouldn't solve anything. So he could only suppress his anger and say coldly, "You brat. You really have no idea how high the sky is or how deep the earth goes." Being how furious Dad was, I knew arguing any further would be pointless. I took a deep breath and said firmly, "Dad, I'll prove it to both of you. My decision is the right one. You'll see just how much potential the electric motorcycle market has. You'll see it for yourselves." With that, I turned away from the dining table and went back to my room. I dropped onto the bed, closed my eyes, and circulated the spiritual energy inside me, feeling that dense and powerful force. Then I looked at the jade bracelet around my wrist. The jade that had once been crystal clear was now dull and lifeless. Time was running out. I had to find another source of spiritual energy before the bracelet was completely drained. There was no other way. This business venture had to succeed. I turned on my computer, began searching through every national standard and policy document related to electric motorcycles, along with every relevant guideline I could find. I carefully read through each one, trying to identify the root of the problem. The electric motorcycle industry struggles had both internal and external causes. I'd already identified the internal problems, but what were the external ones? Infrastructure clearly wasn't the issue. So what was? I soon found the key. The government classified electric motorcycles as motor vehicles. A policy that should have helped regulate and promote the industry had instead become its biggest shackle. License plate and driver's license requirements blocked huge numbers of potential users, and many regulations simply copied standards used for motorcycles and electric cars, which meant electric motorcycles required dedicated charging stations that weren't even compatible with electric cars. These unreasonable restrictions had severely limited the industry's development. On top of that, after 2012, the government hadn't introduced any major new standards, while subsidies had been reduced year after year, pushing the industry even deeper into winter. "Motor vehicles," I murmured, my brows tightly furrowed. "That really is a problem. I'll have to operate right along the edge of the regulations." Thinking back to how electric motorcycles developed in my previous life, a clear idea gradually formed in my mind. First, my product couldn't be classified as a motor vehicle. Second, I had to keep costs as low as possible by optimizing mature products already available on the market. Finally, every specification had to stay right at the lower boundaries of national standards. In short, I had to avoid motor vehicle restrictions entirely. Electric bicycles. My eyes lit up. I'd finally found the breakthrough. In my previous life, the electric motorcycle boom had begun with electric bicycles. So I could call my product an electric bicycle too. That would avoid the restrictions placed on motor vehicles, while preserving the convenience of an electric bike. The moment I thought of that, I immediately began sketching out a design. My drawing skills weren't great, but as long as the concept was clear, that was enough. After finishing the sketch, I started writing a business plan and feasibility report. I'd never written anything like this in my previous life, but I could learn by researching examples. I focused completely on every word, trying to present my ideas and plans as clearly as possible. Just as I was writing smoothly, a startled cry suddenly came from outside my room. I checked the time. It was already past midnight. Who would come over this late? A moment later, I heard the front door open, followed by George's surprised and delighted voice. "Oh, Michael, what brings you here? It's so late. Did something happen?" I looked at the printed draft of my plan and laughed inwardly, feeling even more pleased with myself. The Mitchell family moved even faster than I'd expected. The light of justice had already shone straight onto Ryan's backside. I just wondered how many belts Uncle Michael had broken on him. "You win." Ryan forced the words through clenched teeth. His dad, Michael Mitchell, half shoved, half dragged him into the apartment. The moment Ryan saw me walk out of my room, his anger flared like gasoline catching fire, and instantly burned out of control. His eyes widened, and he let out an angry snort, looking as though he'd suffered the greatest humiliation of his life. Then, he pulled a motorcycle key from his pocket and slammed it onto the coffee table. "Here's your motorcycle back." The moment Michael saw his son's attitude, his temper flared again. "You little brat, I haven't even said anything yet, and you're already acting like someone owes you something? I told you to come return it, and this is the attitude you bring?" His voice was so loud that even the air in the room seemed to tremble. I quickly stepped in to smooth things over. "Uncle Michael, don't be mad, don't be mad. Let me talk to Ryan." As I spoke, I grabbed Ryan and pulled him into my room. the moment the door closed. Ryan glared at me indignantly. Tyler, this was pretty low of you. Did you rat me out? I chuckled and shook my head. What, do you think I have nothing better to do? Just because of a stupid bet. You really think I'm that kind of person? Ryan leaned against the wall and demanded stubbornly. Then tell me how the hell he found out. I pulled out a chair and sat down, then said slowly, Ryan, don't get worked up yet. Do you know what position your dad holds right now? My dad? Ryan snorted. He's the director of the Municipal Public Security Bureau, the top man in the city's police system. Who doesn't know that? I nodded. Exactly. And Uncle Michael is younger than my dad. If he advances one more step, it's entirely possible he could move into the provincial public security department, right? Ryan didn't understand much about official politics, but he knew that much was true. So he nodded. I suddenly changed direction. Then do you know why Deputy Chief Hayes from the Ben High branch was so invested in my case? Ryan snorted. Because my dad ordered him to handle it. What else would it be? I shook my head and sighed. Ryan, you really only see what's on the surface. On the surface, yes, your dad directly arranged it. But another major reason was that Deputy Chief Hayes himself wants a promotion. He wants to transfer out of Ben High District and move up a level. So when your dad assigned my case to him, it became an opportunity for him. If he handles it well, he'll get noticed by higher-ups, and the leadership will remember him. Then when an opportunity comes up, he'll be one of the first people they consider. Ryan froze for a moment. He hadn't expected there to be so many layers behind it. I continued, the same principle applies. There are people around your dad who want to move up too. The second in command wants the top position. If the second in command moves up, then the third in command can become number 2. And it keeps going down the line. There are 2 ways to make your dad's position change. Either he gets promoted or he gets forced out. And people's interests aren't all the same. Some people want him promoted, while others want him gone. If they can't find dirt on your dad, they'll start with the people around him, like you. Ryan's heart skipped, and he stared at me with wide eyes. I tapped the table and continued, you ride around on that motorcycle, dressed the way you are now, and all someone has to do is take one picture, then point out whose son you are, and post it online. Your dad's career could basically be over. The way you look today was already bad enough. Add an expensive motorcycle, and people can easily accuse your dad of corruption and taking bribes. Ryan's heart sank, but he still snorted stubbornly. My dad would never do something like that. If you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear. Let them say whatever they want. I shook my head and sighed. Ryan, have you ever seen Let the Bullets Fly and the story about Little Six? People online don't actually care how many bowls of noodles Little Six ate. They just want to watch him cut open his stomach. So, whether your dad really did anything wrong isn't the point. Once public outrage explodes, your dad will have to be investigated. To you and the people working under him, your dad is a powerful official. But to the country and to the provincial leadership, a 3-legged frog might be hard to find. But officials at your dad's level aren't exactly rare. Ryan's expression changed. He could be dense, but he wasn't stupid. After I laid it out for him, he finally understood how serious the situation was. Teach. He still snorted unwillingly. Fine! I just won't take the bike. I grinned and threw an arm around Ryan's shoulders. Come on, time for plan 2. Remember what I told you? I'd make it possible for you to buy one openly with your own money. With that, I led Ryan out of the room and into the living room, where George and Michael were chatting enthusiastically about their days in the military. I smiled and sat down with them, then placed the motorcycle key on the table and gently pushed it toward Michael. Uncle Michael, let's consider the bike temporarily left in your care. You don't need to worry about anything. I'm preparing to start a business, and I want Ryan to work with me. Michael froze. He hadn't expected me to make such a proposal. I pulled out a loan agreement. I'm planning to lend Ryan $100,000. Then Ryan can invest that $100,000 into my company. In return, I'll give him 5% of the founding shares. After the company pays its first dividend, he can use that money to repay the $100,000. A business? Michael frowned and looked at me suspiciously. Electric motorcycles, George snorted irritably. I don't know what's gotten into this brat. He insists the electric motorcycle market will be worth hundreds of billions, and says everyone else failed because they went down the wrong path. He thinks he's the one who can finally get it right. I handed my business plan to Michael. Uncle Michael, take a look, based on my research. There are 4 main reasons electric motorcycles haven't taken off. First, they're expensive. Second, charging is inconvenient. Third, their range is too short. Fourth, they're restricted by government policy. So here's what I'm planning. My electric motorcycle has to fall outside normal motor vehicle regulations. It needs to stay just below the legal threshold for classification as a motor vehicle. Second, my electric bike has to be chargeable anywhere. It shouldn't require a dedicated charging station. A normal household outlet should be enough. Gulp. Third, range actually isn't that important. As long as charging is convenient, it won't be a major issue. Besides, electric motorcycles are mainly used for short-distance travel, so users won't have much range anxiety. Fourth, I need to drive the cost down as much as possible. I pointed at my sketch. Every unnecessary feature found on current electric motorcycles gets removed. Top speed will be limited to 50 kilometers per hour. The core components will simply be the frame, lights, controller, battery, and motor. I haven't set the final retail price yet, but it'll definitely be less than half the price of the cheapest electric motorcycle currently on the market. Of course, this product won't be launched as an electric motorcycle. It'll be launched as an electric assist bicycle. Michael listened as I explained everything, and his eyes gradually brightened. He had to admit, the idea was genuinely fresh. He wasn't a businessman, but even he could tell it seemed to attack the industry's biggest pain points directly. He'd heard Ryan complain about electric motorcycles countless times, about how terrible they were, and how inconvenient they were, and that buying one was basically paying an idiot tax. But what I was proposing was completely different. No license plate, no driver's license. Charge it anywhere and sell it cheaply. That combination was extremely appealing. Put all those advantages together, and it was practically tailor-made for people who wanted cheap and convenient transportation. Michael thought for a moment, before slowly saying, Tyler, your idea really does have potential. The electric motorcycle market has always struggled because of policy restrictions and flaws in the products themselves, which made it difficult to grow. But your approach does seem to avoid a lot of those problems. If you can actually make it work, the market potential could be enormous. I was delighted. I knew my proposal had caught Michael's interest, but I also knew Michael was a smart man and wouldn't be convinced that easily. Sure enough, Michael changed direction. But this doesn't sound entirely compliant with regulations. The moment I heard that, I immediately pressed my advantage. You're right, Uncle Michael. But this product has enormous market value. Given where our country is in its development right now, solving the problem of affordable transportation for ordinary people is becoming increasingly urgent. I think the government will probably be willing to give something like this a little flexibility. After all, it makes everyday transportation easier for ordinary people. That's serving the public too, isn't it? Michael nodded, and a trace of approval flashed in his eyes. Fine. I'll invest another $200,000. But you have to promise me one thing. Everything you do has to be legal and compliant. Don't put me in a difficult position. I immediately assured him, don't worry, Uncle Michael. I'll absolutely follow the law and regulations. I won't make things difficult for you. I knew perfectly well that as long as the product technically couldn't be classified as a motor vehicle, there would be plenty of room to work with. And electric assist bicycles didn't even have a unified standard yet. Michael snorted, but there was still approval in his eyes. Then he looked toward Ryan. You brat. Go work with Tyler. Learn how to actually get things done. Instead of wandering around doing nothing all day. Ryan still looked a little unwilling, but he knew this was an opportunity. He glared at me and snorted. Fine, I'll give it a shot. I grinned and patted Ryan on the shoulder. Don't worry, Ryan. If you stick with me, I won't let you lose out. Ryan, take a look. These are the places we're hitting today. We've got a lot to cover, so we'll need to move fast. At dawn, just as the first pale light appeared on the horizon, Ryan wandered over to my place and quietly waited for me to wake up. Not long afterward, I came strolling out of my room. Before Ryan could say anything, I shoved a notebook into his hands. We've got a long day ahead. First, we're going to the auto mall to buy a car. I've already picked out what I want. There was no room for negotiation. In my brisk tone, Ryan, you got your driver's license and everything with you, right? Ryan glanced down at the itinerary in his hands and couldn't help clicking his tongue. We've really got a lot of places to hit today, huh? Baron Fashion Mall? You're buying clothes too? Both of us need to look the part, I said while brushing my teeth. Right now, you're basically my driver. But that's temporary. Once we get the company up and running, you'll be Vice President Mitchell and one of the shareholders too. You don't have to wear a suit every day, but for formal occasions, banquets and things like that, you'll need at least one proper outfit. As I spoke, I looked Ryan up and down. Just look at what you're wearing, and then look at your hair. Ryan instinctively touched his bright blonde hair, then glanced down at the random outfit he'd thrown together, and suddenly felt a little awkward. Clothing really did carry labels of class and identity. People like to say everyone was free to dress however they wanted, and that clothes didn't define a person, but different styles still cause people to unconsciously put you into certain categories. Looking at what he was wearing now, there was nothing wrong with it when he hung around his old crowd. His friends even thought it looked cool. But when he imagined people calling him a boss or a vice president someday, the outfit suddenly felt wrong no matter how he looked at it. If he'd been walking around with his street friends like before, he would have thought it looked cool, even badass. But now that he was working with me, everything felt completely different. Nothing about his appearance seemed right, especially the hair. It stood out more than anything. What company executive or vice president dyed his hair bright yellow? Fine, I'll dye it back today. Ryan rubbed his hair and said awkwardly, but our business is definitely going to work. I said without hesitation, and we're going to make it big. Ryan, let me make something clear up front. You have the freedom to dress however you want. If you insist on keeping your style, I won't stop you. But when it comes to business, it doesn't matter much when you're small. Once you get big, people judge the person and the clothes first. If we lose a deal because of you, I'm docking your share. My tone became serious. And about those street friends of yours, we can help them and even bring them along to make money. Over. But Ryan, let me be clear about this too. If they start causing trouble, they won't just ruin my business. They'll ruin yours too. I didn't know much about Ryan's friends, but based on the original owner's memories, they had helped, Ryan back him up, stand beside him when things got tense, and deal with troublemakers at school who bullied me. I was someone who repaid favors. So even though I didn't have a great impression of those guys, I was still willing to give them a chance and bring them along. I just hoped they were merely rebellious and not genuinely bad people. Of course, Ryan had actually been wondering how he should bring this up with me. The moment he heard what I said, he slapped his chest and promised, "Bro, don't worry, I guarantee. Those guys will behave themselves." Good, I nodded. Eat. We start working as soon as breakfast is over. There are still 2 months before school starts. I'm going to Shanghai University of Arts, which is here in the city. But once classes start, I'll have a lot on my plate and won't have as much time for the company. So during these next 2 months, I want to get the basic company structure built and start operations. Can we really do that? Ryan sat down at the table and asked doubtfully, if we're producing electric motorcycles, won't just building the production line take forever? No, I shook my head. For now, we're basically an assembly plant. We just need a big warehouse with enough storage. Wincesses, then hire workers to assemble everything. We don't need the kind of fancy production line you're imagining right now. And for the first run, I'm planning for 100,000 units. Our main focus early on will be product design and choosing retail showroom locations. As for actual manufacturing, we'll place orders directly with factories and have them produce the components to our specifications. Once the parts arrive, workers can assemble them. For every product, we'll use existing components already on the market whenever possible. Only a small number of parts will be custom designed, then outsourced to factories capable of manufacturing them. My voice was full of confidence. As long as the R&D and design team doesn't hold us back, with this country's industrial capacity. If the money is in place, A month and a half to launch is already slow. If it takes longer than that, that's on us. Backed by the strongest manufacturing base in the world. Even a month and a half sounded slow to me. 100,000? Ryan jumped in surprise. Isn't that way too many? No. The 100,000 will be produced in batches. The first batch will only be 5,000. The full 100,000 is mainly so we can establish long-term relationships with certain suppliers, I explained. Some components definitely aren't standard parts, so suppliers will need to create new molds. If our order is too small, they won't bother making custom molds for us. But if the volume is large enough and we'll keep ordering long-term, they'll gladly make dedicated molds for us. Isn't that moving a little too fast? George, who had been listening to my plan at the table, couldn't help frowning. Shouldn't you make a small batch first and test the market, while properly refining the product? We don't have time. I shook my head. This is like a thin sheet of paper waiting to be pierced. There's no major technical barrier. What we need to do now is seize the market and establish the brand. Once we've secured our position, we can gradually upgrade each generation. And during that process, we can keep refining the product until it's as polished as possible. That was also what made competing in the world's strongest manufacturing nation so suffocating. The competition was brutal, and everyone was fighting like crazy. Meanwhile, inside the Carter family's enormous and imposing estate, Mercedes-AMG slowly entered the family's private underground garage. The tires made a faint, scraping sound against the floor, unusually clear in the silent space. The car door opened, and a young woman in high heels and fashionable clothes stepped out from the driver's seat looking to be in her early 20s. Every step she took carried confidence and arrogance. A faint trace of superiority lingered on her face as she looked over the servants working throughout the garage. Some were cleaning, some were carefully washing cars, while others rested in the corner, drivers and bodyguards waiting to be called at any moment. But every one of those faces looked unfamiliar to her. Her delicate brows furrowed, and irritation rose inside her. She had just finished an exhausting film shoot, and had come home full of anticipation, only to discover that every servant had been replaced. There wasn't a single familiar face left. She almost lost her temper, but then remembered that her parents had already warned her that something had happened at home. Grandpa had dismissed all the old servants, and personally hired every one of the new ones. Their salaries were paid directly by Grandpa, too. Her parents no longer had any authority over them, and weren't allowed to hire anyone else. Thinking about that, she suppressed her anger. But resentment still churned beneath the surface. Is Grandpa basically putting Mom and Dad under house arrest? Madison Carter wondered bitterly. She had grown up surrounded by wealth and privilege. From her great-grandfather's generation to her dad's, each heir had been an only son. So there had never been much internal fighting over the family fortune. By her dad's generation, there were more children, but most of them were daughters, and everyone had dreams of their own, so she knew very little about the kind of vicious infighting wealthy families were famous for. Still, she'd acted in several dramas about rich families over the past 2 years, and knew a little about those kinds of plot lines. The situation in front of her made her instinctively think of those stories. And all of this was because of that little bastard they'd just brought home. The moment she thought of her newly returned younger brother, a strange disgust rose inside Madison. Ever since she was young, she'd heard her dad Robert say how greedy government officials could be, and how often they made things difficult for the Carter family. In her mind, government people were no better than a pack of dogs. Throw them a couple of bones, and they'd immediately wag their tails for you. And, since that younger brother had been raised in a household of government officials, how much better could he possibly be? Especially when the moment he returned, her parents ended up effectively confined by Grandpa. That only made Madison hate him even more, feel even more disgusted with this younger brother. She carried an elegant designer handbag, stepped into the private elevator, and headed straight for the third-floor study. Before coming home, she'd already agreed to meet her parents there, and she could roughly guess what they wanted to discuss. The moment she pushed open the door, Madison saw both of her parents sitting on the couch, their faces filled with worry. Robert's face was tense with anger and restraint, his fists clenched tightly, as though he might explode at any moment. Grace looked heartbroken, with tears gathering in her eyes. ready to fall at any second. Madison, you're back. The moment Grace saw her daughter, she hurried over, took her hand, and pulled her down beside her. Her voice trembled slightly. Your oldest sister, second sister, third sister, and fourth sister aren't home. Right now, you're the only one your dad and I can count on. This is about that bastard, isn't it? Madison asked coldly, her voice full of disdain. Robert opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but ultimately stayed silent. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger inside him. He knew this wasn't the time to vent. They needed Madison's help. By the way, Madison continued, what about Ethan and Victoria? How are they? The moment they were mentioned, Grace's tears immediately started pouring down. She sobbed as she spoke. No matter how much we begged him, no matter what we said, he refused. He refused to sign settlement agreements for your sister and Ethan. He's determined to send them both to prison. That monster. How can he be so cruel? Robert listened from the side, his anger surging like an erupting volcano. He clenched his fists, his nails digging deeply into his palms. But he still didn't lose control. He knew. What they needed right now was calm judgment, not impulsiveness. That bastard. Madison shot to her feet and shouted furiously. I knew he was up to no good. Who does he think he is? How dare he treat our family like this? I'll make sure he learns exactly who he's dealing with. A week passed in the blink of an eye. I had no idea that the Carter family's fifth daughter had returned and was already planning how to cause trouble for me. I was busy looking at properties and renting workspace, and my first design team had finally begun to take shape. My adoptive mom had used every connection she had to carefully select the team. There were 5 fresh graduates straight out of college, along with a middle-aged man who had once held a management position at a major company. His name was Daniel Lee. The team included 2 graduates with degrees in mechanical design, one specializing in vehicle engineering for new energy vehicles, one in graphic design, and one in automation and control engineering. There weren't many of them, but it was obvious that these recent graduates still had that uniquely clear-eyed college student stupidity. No, every one of them was filled with dreams and passion. Their faces still carried the innocence and youthful awkwardness of campus life. Daniel Lee, the one with management experience, was around 40. His previous company's profits had been declining in recent years, and unfortunately he'd been laid off during corporate restructuring. Now, they were all gathered inside the warehouse I'd rented. The warehouse was filled with different electric motorcycle models I'd carefully selected from manufacturers across the market. The new company had only just been established. I stood in front of everyone and said firmly, I'll be straightforward about compensation. Uncle Daniel, your monthly salary is $10,000 with full social insurance and housing fund, 9 to 5, weekends off. After you've worked here for a year, you'll receive 1 month of paid vacation every year. For the 5 of you fresh graduates, the starting salary is $5,000 a month, with the same benefits as Uncle Daniel. However, because we're short on time, everyone will need to work overtime for the first project. Overtime will be paid at triple rate. Of course, if you don't want to work overtime, that's your choice. After saying that, I pulled out my sketches and showed them to everyone. Your first task is to design a company logo. The company will be called Pegasus. Your second task, see all those vehicles behind me? Take them apart, then follow my drawings, and build a vehicle exactly like the one shown here. I have 4 requirements. First, keep the cost as low as possible. Second, performance needs to be solid, and it has to run reliably. Third, it must charge from a normal household outlet without requiring a charging station. Fourth, you must follow the drawings closely. Of course, you can still use your creativity, but my design philosophy is simplicity. No unnecessary decoration. As long as it has pedals and lights, that's enough. In short, it needs to be cheap, easy to manufacture, and chargeable from household electricity. Then I turned toward Daniel. I'll leave the team in your hands for now. If you need anything, come directly to me. If we're short on manpower, I'll figure something out. Lululu Demacia. Just then, my phone suddenly rang. I glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Without thinking much about it, I answered, tomorrow morning at 9,030. Odyssey Western Restaurant on Jingyi 5th Road. My name is Madison Carter. A young woman's voice came to the phone, her tone forceful, as though she were assigning me a task. Madison Carter? Who? I was completely confused. Did you call the wrong number? Heh, pretending you don't know me? The woman sneered. Stop putting on an act. But whatever. Remember this. I'm your 5th older sister. You little bastard. Beep, beep, beep. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the number on my screen and immediately felt a headache coming on. Were characters in these real air versus fake air stories all this brainless? Boss? Daniel noticed my expression and asked with concern. It's nothing. I waved it off. Get started. We're a brand new company. Whether we survive depends on everyone's effort. The next day, Ryan drove his newly purchased Audi A6L, with me in the passenger seat, toward Odyssey Western Restaurant on Jingye 5th Road. He glanced back at me, while I rested with my eyes closed, and asked worriedly, Bro, are you sure this meeting is okay? I'm fine. I opened my eyes. Ryan, just stay outside. You don't need to get involved in anything else. If you hear me say, call the police through the earpiece, then call them immediately. How could everything possibly be fine? Based on what I knew about these real air versus fake air stories, something was definitely going to happen today, but it didn't matter. I'd already prepared a miniature camera, hidden inside my jacket pocket. I genuinely wanted to see what kind of stunt this so-called 5th sister planned to pull. With that, I got out of the car and entered the restaurant. After giving Madison's name, I was led to the private room she'd reserved. About half an hour later, the sharp click-clack of high heels approached. I didn't even need to think about it. This was probably my 5th sister by blood. Before I could fully prepare myself, a furious-looking woman shoved the door open and stormed inside. She swept her gaze around the room, with unmistakable arrogance in her eyes. As though the entire room dimmed the moment she entered, she walked straight toward me, dropped into the seat across from me, and skipped even the most basic greeting. Tyler, I came here today for one reason. Madison got straight to the point, her voice cold as ice. Sign settlement agreements for my useless brother Ethan and my sister Victoria. Then they can get out, and this whole thing ends here. I frowned slightly, lifted my coffee, and took a small sip, while calmly looking at Madison. The public security authorities are already pursuing charges against them, and these are criminal cases. This isn't something that can be solved just because I sign a settlement agreement. It's a criminal case. Madison raised her brows, her voice sharp. Don't try to scare me with that. He just took a few things from his own family. And boys your age all have some adolescent fantasies, don't they? Ethan just made the kind of mistake plenty of teenage boys make. Besides, he only took his admiration for his sister a little too far. How does something like that count as a crime? And Victoria. What exactly did she do wrong? She owns plenty of expensive jewelry. If she remembered the price of 1 or 2 pieces wrong, how is that such a big deal? And you demanded an outrageous amount. $50 million right off the bat. Then Grandpa secretly gave you $60 million. If I posted that online, your family wouldn't have an easy time either, would they? Madison looked at me with a smug smile. She didn't really understand the difference between people inside and outside the government system. But she did know that both groups seemed afraid of public scandals, especially government employees. After finally securing a stable position, getting dragged into an online controversy could cost them their jobs and ruin their futures. That's $60 million. If this little bastard dared take it, then she could use it against me. She could expose me online and say I took money without keeping my end of the deal. Accuse my adoptive parents of corruption and accepting bribes, and accuse the police of protecting criminals and shielding their own. Then, she wanted to see how this little bastard would clean up the mess. I set down my coffee cup and folded my hands on the table. My tone turned faintly amused. That's $60 million. First, part of it was personal compensation paid to me. I have an official injury assessment. Second, your grandfather voluntarily paid the money because he wanted to suppress the scandal involving your parents, brother, and sister, and keep the situation from spreading. He gave it to me willingly. I had an agreement with your grandfather. Third, Ethan and Victoria are involved in criminal cases. If you want them released, you should apply for bail pending investigation, not come here and pound the table at me. Fourth, by blood. I'm also a member of the Carter family. So this money is partly, no, it's compensation for the Carter family failing to find me all these years. Madison's expression changed, and she slammed the table with a loud bang. Stop throwing legal provisions at me. Our second sister is a lawyer. She's the star attorney at Gold City Law Firm. I understand the law better than you do. And let's talk about what happened at home. Are you seriously saying you did nothing wrong? Why don't you take a look at yourself? Everything was perfectly fine before. Then you showed up, and within 3 days, the whole family fell apart. Every bit of this is your fault. My fault? My expression darkened, but I remained polite and calmly asked in return. In those 3 days, I ate exactly 3 meals at the Carter estate. Mrs. Carter locked me in the villa's basement storage room without even asking what really happened, and kept me there for 2 days and 1 night. Mr. Carter whipped me for no reason. I never went anywhere, and Ethan still accused me of being a thief. As for Victoria, she was the one who claimed the necklace was worth $10 million, and she was the one demanding I pay for it, when I couldn't come up with that kind of money. She stood there screaming for Mr. Carter to beat me. Then the recovered surveillance footage proved I never even went upstairs. On the first night, I slept in a guest room downstairs. On the second day, I was locked in the basement. On the third day, they dragged me out and beat me. And you're saying I'm the problem? If you're not the problem, then who is? Madison rolled her eyes at me, her contempt impossible to hide. That dogshit family of yours, those dogshit friends you hang around with, and the dogshit things you people do. What are you government system people anyway? Just a pack of dogs raised by the Carter family. No, you're more like stray dogs that come to our family, wagging your tails and begging for food. As she spoke, Madison pulled a check from her bag and slapped it onto the table. $5 million. Take it and give it to your little friends. Isn't this all because we didn't give you enough money? You just want more, don't you? I suggest you take it and get them released. Otherwise, I'll make sure both you and your adoptive family, and that Mitchell family of yours, regret ever crossing us. I glanced at the check and was genuinely speechless. What kind of situation was this? Did everyone in the Carter family seriously have no brains? Was this really how the biological sisters in these real heir versus fake heir stories acted? This whole family really was perfectly matched. So many people, and somehow not one functioning brain between them. I shook my head. And kept the last trace of a smile on my face. Ms. Carter, I'm not refusing to sign because of money. This is criminal law. The state is prosecuting the case. Do you understand what that means? Madison jumped to her feet in fury and pointed a finger straight at my nose. Don't think I can't do anything to you. If you refuse to sign that settlement agreement, then don't blame me for what happens next. Before she'd even finished speaking, Madison raised her hand and slapped me hard across the face. Her eyes were filled with provocation and disdain. I'm telling you right now, if you don't agree today, you're not walking out of this room. The slap left my ears ringing, and a red handprint instantly appeared across my cheek. My eyes widened as I stared at Madison in disbelief. Before I could say anything, she raised her hand and tried to slap me again and again. I'd already taken 1 hit. There was no way I was going to keep taking them. I shifted left and right, dodging every follow-up strike. You animal. You actually dare dodge me? Madison was beside herself with rage. Her eyes locked tightly on me. I touched my cheek. That first slap had been brutal. It felt like this crazy woman had put every ounce of strength she had into it. The side she'd hit was already badly swollen, and blood had appeared at the corner of my mouth. I suppressed my anger, but my mind remained unusually calm. I even felt like laughing. I lightly touched my swollen cheek, even though I was the one who'd been hit. I smiled. There was almost pity in that smile, as if I were reminding her. Harder. You just destroyed your own future. Do you know what happens if I call the police? Do you? So what if I hit you? Madison still had no idea what she'd just done. She shouted arrogantly, I'm your older sister. I have every right to hit you. You deserved it. So, what if I slap you a few more times? This really was the legendary slap-happy sister from those fake Air stories. I laughed. A brain is a wonderful thing. Too bad you don't have one. Everything was happening almost exactly as I'd predicted. Now I had everything I needed. The moment I saw another slap coming, I moved. Enough! I flipped the table over, then pulled back, and suddenly jumped out of her reach before steadying myself. I sucked in a breath, my tone mocking but perfectly calm. Let me explain something to you. Assaulting someone without cause can result in either an administrative public security penalty or criminal punishment. Under Article 43 of the Public Security Administration Punishments Law, if someone assaults another person without causing an injury serious enough to qualify as a minor injury or worse, they can be detained for 5 to 10 days and fined between $200 and $500. I already warned you, but you showed no remorse and kept trying to hit me. That counts as an aggravated circumstance, which means more than 10 days of detention, plus a fine of $500 to $1,000. And if my injury assessment comes back as a minor injury, then you're looking at up to 3 years behind bars. Heh. Madison didn't look scared at all. She pulled a stack of 100 yuan bills from her bag and casually tossed them into the air. I've got plenty of money. Besides, you're my little brother. This is a family matter. The police can't touch me. But the very next second, someone who absolutely could touch her charged into the room and pinned Madison down against the table. Click, click, the handcuffs snapped around her wrists, and they hauled her away. You damn bastards. You animals. What right do you have to arrest me? What law did I even break? Madison shrieked, her eyes bulging with rage, as if fire might burst from them. Her voice was sharp and piercing, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, completely hysterical. Help! They're abusing their authority. They're acting above the law. She struggled wildly while screaming at the top of her lungs, looking exactly like a crazed woman throwing a tantrum. Madison still hadn't fully figured out what was even happening before the officers mercilessly cuffed her. This was the first time in her life she had ever worn those cold restraints, although before this, she had always looked down on public officials with contempt and disdain. The power of those handcuffs was brutally direct and instantly filled her with a fear she'd never experienced before. She kept screaming and cursing, her hysterical behavior enough to make anyone uneasy. The 2 female officers who had come to arrest her could barely control her wild struggling. Fortunately, more officers had arrived this time, and, with help from 2 more female officers, they forcibly shoved Madison into the police car and took her away. Everyone in the Carter family is insane, especially that woman. Back inside the restaurant's private room, Brian had already been listening to everything through the earpiece. Madison's attitude alone had made him furious. He came storming inside, and the moment he saw my swollen face, his mood became even worse. God damn it. I've never even laid a hand on you. How the hell did that crazy woman dare hit you that hard? He roared and turned to charge outside, as though he was ready to fight Madison himself. Stop. I lightly touched my burning cheek, and the sharp pain made me frown. My gaze turned colder as I asked in a low voice, "Where are you going?" "Don't cause trouble." Ryan stopped and looked at me with a mixture of anger and grievance, as though he'd somehow been wronged even more than I had. "What do you mean, cause trouble? If we're pissed off, then that crazy woman deserves to be taught a lesson." "Oh, damn it. My dad told me to watch your back, and even I never dared hit you. This is humiliating as hell." He waved his arms around, completely worked up. "Quit yelling." I calmly took another sip of coffee, said evenly, "We've already graduated from school, even if it was only high school. We've temporarily left campus life behind and entered society. The rules out here aren't the same as the rules at school. You can't take the way things worked at school and apply it to the real world. Sure, slapping someone back would feel great, but hitting back could create a whole new problem. I'd been a cop in my previous life, so I knew how difficult it could be to establish legitimate self-defense. Taking one slap might look like I was the one who lost, but that wasn't necessarily true over the past few days. I'd also been seriously studying this world's criminal law, public security law, civil law and relevant cases. Watch. The person who threw that slap was going to pay a huge price for it. Just then, the door opened again, and a police officer walked in. The moment I looked up, I realized it was the same officer I'd met at the Carter estate last time, along with his young partner, Uncle Daniel, Officer Lewis. I immediately stood up and greeted them with a smile. What a coincidence. Are you here to take my statement? Just ask you a few questions. Officer Daniel Sullivan replied seriously. We happened to be patrolling nearby and saw Ryan here, so we chatted for a bit. When we heard you were meeting someone from the Carter family again, we figured something might happen, so we called for backup ahead of time. Then I really have to thank you, Uncle Daniel, I said gratefully. When do you get a day off? I'll treat you and Officer Lewis to dinner. Forget dinner. Officer Sullivan waved it off. We just need to ask you about what happened today. At that, I pulled out the miniature camera, hidden inside my jacket pocket, checked the footage, then handed it to Officer Sullivan. You can watch it yourself. Officer Sullivan took the camera, and only then noticed that the left breast pocket of my jacket looked unusual. It appeared to have been specially modified, specifically to conceal a recording device. He didn't comment on it, and simply started reviewing the footage. After a while, he finished watching the important parts. Then he said seriously, go get another injury assessment. That face looks bad enough to potentially qualify as a minor injury. Officer Lewis, go back to the station and issue the referral. Move fast and send it directly to the hospital. Then he looked at my face again and shook his head. The Carter family really thinks they're above the law. Officer Sullivan had been a cop for many years, and he'd genuinely never seen a family this bizarre. There was no point saying anything more. Officer Sullivan led the way, with me following behind. This time, I had my own car, so I had Ryan drive and follow Officer Sullivan to the hospital. Because arrangements had already been made in advance, everything moved quickly. The examination was finished in no time, and we walked out of the hospital. Bro, where are we going next? Ryan turned to look at me in the back seat and asked unwillingly. He'd come here to protect me, yet hadn't protected me at all. I'd still gotten slapped across the face. Never mind what would happen if his dad found out. About this later, Ryan himself couldn't get past it. In the past, protecting me had been something his dad required, though friendship had also played a part. But now I was bringing him along to make money, giving him a future where he could become an executive and openly buy the motorcycles he loved with his own money. That kind of friendship made it impossible for him to tolerate seeing me bullied. And yet today, that crazy woman had hit me this badly. He hated it. He just couldn't let it go. The Carter estate. I closed my eyes and rested as I answered. I've been thinking our startup funds are still a little tight. Last time, that old man paid up, so I didn't make a big issue out of it. But now they're coming after me again, so I'm not going to be nearly as easy to deal with this time. Let's go collect some interest first. There's no rush to deal with mediation. Officer Sullivan already said, the evidence is solid. They can detain Madison for a day first. Then, once the injury report comes back, we can start discussing mediation. So I wasn't in any hurry. I could let Madison suffer for a while first. If she learned something from it, I might still let her off this. But if she didn't learn, then she couldn't blame me for what came next. Oh, right. I suddenly remembered something and opened my eyes. Ryan, did you already talk to those friends of yours? Huh? Ryan froze. I'd previously said I was willing to bring them along to make money. But unlike Ryan, I hadn't promised them specific positions. I'd only said the company was still new and didn't need that many people yet, so they should wait for word from me. Now that I suddenly brought them up, could it mean, oh, I get it. Ryan gave me a knowing look and immediately reached for his phone. Don't do anything stupid. I shot him a look that clearly said, you don't get a damn thing. Jabia, and said, Ryan, the rules of society aren't about throwing punches and kicks or putting sacks over people's heads. This isn't some gangster movie where you grab a machete and fight over territory. It's about suits and ties, drinks around a table, connections, favors, and knowing how to deal with people. Ryan scratched his head. He really didn't understand this stuff. All he understood was that this wasn't the time to gather the guys and go teach the Carter family a lesson. Still, something about it felt contradictory. If they weren't going to fight, why was I asking him to gather his friends? Ryan, I closed my eyes again and said while taking a short rest, remember one thing, I may not need to use it, but I absolutely can't afford not to have it. And you'll understand soon enough just how valuable that spoiled young lady's slap really was. Based on the usual plots in these fake heir stories, there were plenty of times when the adopted heir, or even his loving family, would resort to methods that couldn't be brought into the light. So I still needed to understand the underground forces in this world. If they were the same as in my previous life, nothing more than bugs crushed tightly under the law, then there was obviously nothing to fear. But if this world was like those urban power fantasy novels, centered around wealthy young masters, where underground forces wielded enormous influence, then I'd need to start building some power of my own. And besides, based on what the old cultivator had taught me in my dreams about the secrets of cultivation and his own experiences, even though spiritual energy had nearly vanished from this world, cultivators, demons, ghosts, and strange creatures still existed, along with certain people with unusual constitutions. If that was the case, could this world also have organizations like the Dragon Clan, or special security departments, dedicated specifically to handling supernatural matters? That was something else I needed to be careful about. I pulled out the laptop stored in the car and started transferring the video evidence onto it. Ryan kept driving, and about an hour later, we slowly arrived at the Carter estate. No one stopped us from the moment we entered the Villa district, and when we reached the estate entrance, several maids were already waiting outside. The moment the car stopped, they stepped forward to open the doors, as though welcoming the head of the family home. I didn't mind in the slightest. I glanced at Ryan as he got out behind me, looking as tense as if he were walking into enemy territory, and laughed. Relax, Yetches. Then I turned toward the driver, who was preparing to take the car into the underground garage. Just leave it here. We'll be leaving again soon. Finally, I looked toward an older man dressed differently from everyone else. He wore a tailcoat, white gloves, and carried himself with exceptional dignity. He looked to be around 50. You're the new butler? I asked. Yes, young master. The elderly butler replied politely. Welcome home. My name is William Bennett. You may call me Butler Bennett. This isn't really my home yet. I narrowed my eyes slightly, correcting his wording. Then I asked, where are Mr. Carter and Mrs. Carter? Have them come see me. Yes, young master. Butler Bennett showed no anger whatsoever at my somewhat arrogant attitude, nor did he show even the slightest intention of defending the people who were, supposedly, the heads of the household, Robert and Grace Carter. He simply turned and walked back into the villa. Ryan stared at me in surprise. Why did it feel like I was the real owner of this place? Unable to contain his curiosity, he asked, didn't you already leave this family? Why does everyone here seem to listen to you? And how do you seem to know everything that's going on? There are smart people in the Carter family, I replied calmly. If Robert and Grace weren't Charles Carter's son, daughter-in-law, they would have been thrown out too. What do wealthy families care about most? Profit, reputation, and bloodline. Robert's family still has genuine blood ties to Charles. Otherwise, the old man would have never tolerated them. As for me, I was certain Charles was keeping an eye on everything I did. Whether my startup succeeded would be one of the key factors determining whether I gained absolute leverage. In this whole real heir versus fake heir mess, I didn't want to waste too much time on idiots like Robert and the rest of his family. I only hoped they'd behave themselves, hold on to whatever little influence they still had, and stop making their situation worse. After waiting for a while, Robert and Grace finally came outside. Both looked furious and unwilling, but several bodyguards stood behind them, so neither dared do anything. Take this and watch it. I pulled out an SD card and handed it to Robert. I have 3 copies of the video evidence. One is backed up in cloud storage. One is on my phone, and one has already been submitted to the police as evidence. I've already completed the injury assessment. The report should be out by tomorrow morning. After that, I'll go to mediation. Take a look at the handprint on my face. It was only one slap, but there's a lot behind that one slap. Maybe you should go ask your lawyer daughter about it. I pointed at my swollen face and smiled mockingly. Right now, my adorable fifth sister is sitting in a police station cell. You'd better make your choice quickly. If she gets out early enough, she might still save her career. But if you wait too long, she could end up spending the next 2 years working a prison sewing machine. Mrs. Carter, you wouldn't want to watch your daughter destroy her own future, would you? Oh, right. I don't know if you've heard, but I'm starting a business. Considering we're related by blood, shouldn't you give me a little financial support for free? You, Robert's voice nearly cracked. His eyes bulged, as though he wanted to swallow me alive. You heartless monster. You heartless monster. He hadn't understood much else, but he definitely understood the part about his precious fifth daughter. Sitting in police custody, Robert's voice sounded like a wounded beast. How could you do this to her? You're her biological younger brother. How could you bring yourself to do this? Robert's body swayed unsteadily. His trembling finger pointed at me, and his voice was filled with despair and rage. You ungrateful bastard. You've ruined her future. Do you even understand that? That was her future in the entertainment industry. The stage she'd dreamed about. How could you be this cruel? How could you? The entertainment industry? I couldn't tell whether he was grieving for his daughter, or grieving for all the money he'd invested in her. His fifth daughter had always wanted to become a celebrity. That was her dream. And, as her dad, Robert had been willing to help make that dream come true. It wasn't purely out of fatherly love. There were also business interests involved. If he could turn his own daughter into a star, he could, later, collaborate with Sunrise Entertainment, one of the group's subsidiaries, and use her popularity to help drive the family's entertainment business. Sunrise Entertainment's performance had been declining for the past 2 years. Every new artist they launched had remained lukewarm, and every movie they'd invested in had lost money, leaving them badly burned. Robert's plan had been simple. Since his fifth daughter wanted to become a celebrity anyway, why invest in outsiders instead of investing in his own daughter? Wasn't the entertainment industry built on image, resources, and connections? As the richest man in Shanghai, he had plenty of money and plenty of connections. Throw in millions or tens of millions. Hire the best agents, the best image management teams, and the best coaches. Even if his daughter couldn't sing, act, or dance, she was beautiful enough to attract plenty of attention. By using money to clear the way, he finally managed to get her a role in a production directed by a filmmaker with both domestic and international recognition. After all that effort, he'd planned to give her even more intensive training once she returned, especially in acting and singing. Then, push her career to the next level. But instead, she'd left home in the morning and ended up in police custody before noon. His youngest son and youngest daughter hadn't even gotten out yet. And now, another child had gone in. Grace was sobbing hysterically, while screaming at me, "You heartless, ungrateful monster. How could you treat your own sister like this? She's your biological sister. Is your heart made of stone? How can you be this cruel? How can you be this heartless?" She suddenly lunged at me, trying to claw at me, but the bodyguards stopped her. Grace struggled and screamed, "You animal. You ungrateful brat. You destroyed our family. You ruined Victoria. You ruined Ethan, and now you've ruined Madison too. How could you do this to us? How can you be so cruel?" Robert's eyes were bloodshot as he roared hoarsely. What did I ever do to deserve this? How did I end up with a son who turns against his own family? Did a dog eat your conscience? Her future. You destroyed every dream she ever had. Do you understand that? Do you even understand? He staggered forward a couple of steps, as though every bit of strength had drained from his body. His eyes were filled with despair and hatred as he stared at me, like he was looking at a complete stranger. From this moment on, I sever our father-son relationship. You are no longer my son. I, Robert Carter, have no son like you. I raised an eyebrow. Wasn't this completely backward? In stories about real and fake heirs, wasn't the real heir supposed to be the one who demanded to cut ties, while the parents desperately refused? Why was my story going the opposite way? Grace continued sobbing, her voice thick with resentment. How can you be so heartless? How can you treat us like this? What have we ever done to you? Why are you doing this to us? You destroyed our family. You destroyed everything we had. I'll never let this go. I'll never forgive you. I looked at them coldly, without the slightest emotion in my eyes. I shook my head, as though I'd expected all of this. The evidence is right there. You, Robert Carter, illegally punished and assaulted me. Your wife unlawfully detained me. Your youngest daughter was involved in extortion, and your youngest son has even more charges hanging over him. You brought all of this on yourselves. So how did it somehow become my fault? Robert roared. You ungrateful bastard. You still dare argue? If it weren't for you, how would Victoria have ended up in custody? She's always been so sensible, so well-behaved. You ruined her. And Madison. All she wanted was to become a star. What did she do wrong? Why did you have to treat her like this? Grace immediately chimed in. Exactly. What did Madison ever do wrong? She was only trying to pursue her own dream. What right did you have to treat her this way? You ungrateful brat. You curse. Why did you come back? Why did you come back just to destroy our family? I laughed coldly. Madison, if she wants to become a celebrity, then she should obey the law, not rely on your family's power and money to do whatever she wants. She's in custody because she broke the law. That has nothing to do with me. As for the other two, I didn't force either of them to commit crimes. Robert trembled with rage. He could only stare at me, his voice shaking. You unfilial son. How can you talk like that? Do you even realize that you've destroyed everything our family had? You ruined Victoria's reputation and destroyed Madison's future. How is the Carter family supposed to show its face after this? Grace cried even harder and screamed, You monster! You heartless thing! How could you treat us like this? We treated you so well, and this is how you repay us. How are we supposed to face anyone now? What are we supposed to do with all this pain? I looked at the two of them with a strange expression, my eyes filled with contempt. I genuinely couldn't understand how either of them could say things like this with a straight face. Had I transmigrated into the wrong world? Or had these two somehow gotten the wrong script? They sounded like NPCs whose dialogue had bugged out. Do you two even hear yourselves? Are you seriously saying you treated me well? I almost laughed. You treated me well? Robert roared, You ungrateful bastard. You're still arguing? How did we ever treat you badly? We fed you, clothed you, and gave you the best education. And this is how you treat us. You're completely heartless, Grace cried. You ungrateful brat. How can you say that and still have a conscience? We sacrificed so much for you. And this is how you repay us. Do you even know how deeply everything you've done has hurt us? I'm going to sue you. I'll fight you to the bitter end. Robert craned his neck and shouted even louder. I'll take you to court. I'll file petitions. I refuse to believe there's nowhere in this country where justice exists. I shook my head, finding the whole thing ridiculous. Then I took out my phone and played a video. It showed everything Madison had done in the private dining room earlier that day. I said coldly, As for your fifth daughter, watch the video yourself. And if you want to sue me, go ahead. Take me to court if you want. Go to the prosecutor's office too. File complaints and petitions. Call the mayor's public hotline. You can even write directly to the country's top leader. I don't care. Do whatever you want. But I'm telling you now, none of it will help. I didn't know any of the officers handling these cases beforehand. No one connected to me interfered with the investigation. So there's no possibility of favoritism or manipulation. I haven't bribed a single person. My hands are clean. Robert and Grace stared at the recording. Even with undeniable evidence right in front of them, neither of them would admit they were wrong. Robert's voice trembled. You ungrateful bastard. How could you do this to us? Do you even understand that these deceptive things you're putting together could destroy everything our family has? Grace cried out too. You monster. You heartless thing. How could you treat us like this? We treated you so well. And this is how you repay us. How are we supposed to face anyone? How are we supposed to live like this? I looked at them, my eyes full of mockery. Forget it. I guess getting some people to admit they're wrong really is harder than killing them. It wasn't even that unusual. In my previous life, I'd seen people commit unforgivable crimes, and still refused to believe they'd done anything wrong, let alone these two, who had clearly been praised and catered to their entire lives, surrounded by people constantly flattering and agreeing with them. Growing up in an environment like that, they probably didn't even have the concept of admitting fault. Forget it. I don't want to say anything else. I'll leave you with one sentence. The fact that I'm talking to you here, instead of going straight to Grandpa Charles, is me preserving your dignity. You should be thinking about how to preserve what's left of it, not standing here arguing with me. With that, I turned around and prepared to leave. But when I glanced back, I met Robert and Grace's venomous stares, as though they wanted me dead. My expression grew even colder. I turned to Ryan. Come on, we're going inside. With that, I led Ryan straight into the villa. Butler Bennett followed quietly behind us. At the entrance to the estate, only Robert and Grace remained, along with the two bodyguards accompanying them. After walking for a while and reaching the villa, I finally asked Butler Bennett, "Where's the surveillance room? Take me there." Butler Bennett immediately bowed slightly and gestured ahead. "Young master, please follow me." I had to admit, Butler Bennett really knew how to do his job. The moment he realized I wanted to visit the surveillance room, he began explaining how the surveillance system operated. There are two teams assigned to surveillance. The cameras are divided into 3 zones: the exterior zone, interior zone, and private zone. One of the 2 teams has a fixed roster, with 9 people in total. There is no supervisor. Everyone holds the same rank. They're divided across 3 shifts: morning, evening, and overnight, with personnel always stationed in the surveillance room. So the system is staffed 24 hours a day. The second team doesn't have fixed personnel. It also operates across 3 shifts, with 2 people per shift. They're randomly selected from the estate's security staff, excluding permanently stationed guards and personal bodyguards. The exterior surveillance zone mainly covers outdoor gardens, sports areas, and other activity spaces. Those cameras operate 24 hours a day and can be accessed remotely at any time. The interior zone covers corridors inside the villa, the living room, staircases, underground garage, kitchen, and other indoor areas. These are considered shared spaces within the estate's private areas. The cameras in these areas also run 24 hours a day, but they're completely offline, physically disconnected from the internet. After all, for the family living here, the interior of the villa is far more private. They don't want hackers breaking into the system and exposing footage from inside the house. However, external network access ports were reserved. So if the family insists, or there's an emergency, the system can still be connected to the internet. Finally, there are the private areas, which mainly means the study rooms and bedrooms. Those areas only have cameras and storage devices. There are no live monitoring screens. If you want to view the footage, you have to enter the storage room and access the hard drives. And getting inside requires a key. Only Robert Carter originally had that key. However, Ethan took advantage of how much his parents spoiled him, stole the key, and made himself a copy. Last time, he used that copied key to get inside, removed the hard drives, connected them to another computer, and deleted the footage. But because the process was so complicated, he didn't have time to physically destroy the drives or hide them. In the end, the police took all of the hard drives and managed to recover the evidence from them. The surveillance room itself is located inside the underground garage. There's a dedicated room specifically for monitoring, and it's fairly well hidden. Butler Bennett soon led me down to the basement level. He had also sent word ahead, telling every bodyguard who might be assigned to surveillance duty to gather together and wait there for us. Ryan and I walked around the group once. Then I told him, go talk to these guys for a bit and see if there's anyone here you think is worth keeping an eye on. Ryan looked a little surprised, but since it was an order from the boss, he could only get to work. He scanned the group and quickly picked out 2 or 3 men. After asking them a few questions, he brought over a young man who looked rather simple, with slightly vacant eyes. Him. Ryan patted the young man on the back. He looks like someone you can trust. The young man had dark skin, short hair, and a square face. He even looked a little like Wang Baochang. I asked, name, age, and date of birth. You look underage. Why are you working here? The young man answered in a dull voice, with a heavy Northwestern accent. My name's Wade King. I don't know my birth chart. I was born on March 6, 2003. I've got one younger brother and two younger sisters. My grandparents are dead. My dad came out here for work, fell, broke his leg, and ended up crippled. My mom has a bad back and can't do heavy labor either. So I dropped out of school to make money for her treatment and also earn enough to keep my brother and sisters in school. I quickly calculated with my fingers, although I was still only a beginner at divination. With information this detailed, the calculation itself wasn't difficult. I only wanted to know whether there was any risk of him facing a death sentence in the future. I silently repeated Wade's birth date, March 6, 2003, then converted it according to the lunar calendar. Giwa year, Jain month, Wuyan day. My fingers moved slightly as I rapidly worked through the patterns of the I Ching and 8 trigrams, arranging the heavenly stems and earthly branches according to year, month, and day, and examining the cycles of generation and restraint between them. Gi water was yin, while Wei earth concealed Yi wood, Ji earth, and Ding fire. Gai water sat above earth, and although it was restrained, Yi wood could still break through the earth, while Ding fire warmed the structure, giving it strength beneath a gentle exterior. In the Jain month, when wood was strong, the Wu Earth Daymaster received support from hidden Ding fire, while Yin wood concealed Jia wood and Bing fire, forming a structure where pressure and support reinforced one another. This suggested someone with a firm and resilient personality, who wouldn't fear hardship. On a Wu Yin day, earth and wood stood together, while Bing fire hidden within Yin warmed and strengthened the earth. And because Wu Earth itself was naturally solid, it represented an honest and dependable nature, capable of carrying great burdens. I continued examining the chart carefully. Although I didn't have an exact birth hour, I could still infer from the Daymaster that this person would likely receive help from righteousness or noble benefactors, giving him an especially strong sense of loyalty and honor. I nodded inwardly. Wade King's birth chart showed that he was loyal and courageous, with signs of noble fortune in his destiny. Although born into poverty, he had ambition, and remembered every kindness shown to him. I looked up at Wade, with a trace of approval in my eyes. Since Ryan thinks highly of you, I'll trust his judgment too. So, tell me, how much are you making right now? What benefits do you get? Wade scratched his head, and glanced at Butler Bennett. Butler Bennett nodded, signaling that he could answer. $3,500 a month. With food and housing included, I wasn't surprised. After thinking for a moment, I said, give me your payroll account information. Starting today, your existing salary and benefits stay exactly the same. I'll personally pay you another $5,000 every month. And I'll cover full social insurance and housing fund contributions too. Also, Butler Bennett rent an apartment here in Shanghai and bring his entire family over. His younger brother and sisters should attend the best local schools available. Bring his mother to the military hospital and make sure she gets proper treatment. Once she's recovered, she can work at my company. When the company gets bigger, we'll need someone to cook for everyone. She should be able to handle that. As for his dad, I also need someone I can trust to help watch the warehouse. I'd just taken the opportunity to roughly calculate Wade's family too, since I didn't have their personal information. The result wasn't very accurate, but I could at least tell they were honest people, even if they had minor flaws. Nothing about them seemed dangerous. Young master, Wade froze. He truly couldn't understand why the young master of this family would treat him so well. But this offer really could save his entire family. His eyes immediately turned red, and he started dropping to his knees in gratitude. But I grabbed him before he could kneel. A man's knees are worth gold. You kneel to heaven, to earth, and to your parents, not to an ordinary man like me. I'm not giving you charity. Starting today, you take orders from me and me alone. At the same time, you'll keep working here and remain assigned to the surveillance room. First, you need to learn everything you can about every member of the Carter family. Memorize every one of their faces. If you see any Carter family member return, or notice them holding any secret meetings, or making unusual trips, tell me. The same goes for all of you. I turned toward the remaining security guards. I want to know who comes to the Carter estate, who leaves, when people gather, and what they're doing. Pass everything you learn to Wade, and Wade will report it to me. Every useful piece of information earns you 1,000. If it's especially important to me, I'll pay an additional bonus. But if anyone tries feeding me garbage just to collect money, don't blame me for what happens. Then I looked back at Wade and thought for a moment, you're not using that old name anymore. Starting today, your name is Victor King. Victor for wisdom, courage, and loyalty. There it is. Detected, host system binding process, initializing. Super invincible, omnipotent number 1, entertainment system. Binding process underway. Binding, D, second. Couple of rough but deliberately gentle calls hit my ears like a sandstorm sweeping through the morning light, lightly rattling against my head and kicking me straight out of deep sleep. I rubbed my tired eyes and asked groggily, was I talking in my sleep? Ryan was reclined in the passenger seat with an amused smile on his face. You weren't even in the car for 2 minutes before you were already off playing chess with the Sandman. I was going to talk to you about those friends of mine, but you were sleeping so well. I figured I'd just park here and wait until you woke up. I even took a nap myself. We've all been completely exhausted lately. I stretched and sighed. Ryan stretched too, and being a billionaire, then sighed. Being a boss really isn't as easy as I thought. I figured I'd finally get to relax. But instead, I have to worry about every tiny detail. You call that tired. I rubbed my shoulder, picked up the Coke lying on the seat, and took a long drink. Then I laughed. Seriously, Ryan, you need to start learning management. And I'm not talking about the stuff they teach in textbooks. And I don't mean whatever you're learning in vocational college either. I mean real, hands-on management experience. Read more whenever you have time, and learn as much as you can from Daniel at the company. If I put you in charge of a branch someday, don't end up unable to handle anything and run the whole company into the ground. Shh. Ryan curled his lip and straightened his seat, pretending to sound dismissive. You really think I'm that kind of guy? It's just managing a few people. Piece of cake. I can handle it easily. And that was what he said. But his voice had clearly lost a lot of confidence over the past few days. He'd watched me running around nonstop, and honestly felt a little overwhelmed just looking at it. The company didn't have many employees. You could practically count them on your fingers. Yet there was still a mountain of work. Every morning when Ryan came over, he'd see me checking the day's schedule, contacting suppliers, calling Daniel to ask about progress, and dealing with all kinds of problems inside the team. Looks like I need to hire a secretary. I rubbed my temples and thought for a moment before saying, and we need to build a dedicated logistics team too. Definitely. Ryan nodded in agreement. I used to think a secretary was just someone you could sleep with. But now I see that's not what a secretary is for at all. I rolled my eyes at Ryan and silently prayed that he'd stop confusing a secretary with a mistress. Come on, let's go meet your guys. Oh, and one more thing. Make me a detailed list of every one of them. Who has good physical fitness? Who's smart? Who has bad habits? What kind of character each person has? Who can be trusted? Who can't? Who has a clean record? Who's gotten into trouble before? What they did? Whether they've ever been detained or jailed? I want all of it clearly marked. Ryan instantly felt like his head was twice its normal size. He grimaced. Bro, do we really have to make it that detailed? Of course, I said seriously. These people are the foundation we're working with right now. Every one of them needs a file. For the ones worth developing, we'll even need to visit their families personally. In the future, there may be things that aren't convenient for us to handle directly, so we'll need them to do it. If you don't know these people inside and out, it's easy for someone to scare them off. Then not only does the job fail, we end up embarrassed too. You know the founder of JD, right? Before he became successful, he ran a restaurant. And because he trusted his employees too much, without checking anything, his chef and accountant teamed up and screwed him over. The restaurant went bankrupt. I spoke earnestly. Learn from other people's mistakes, so you don't repeat them yourself. If you don't do proper background checks, how can you trust them with important work, especially sensitive work? I opened my little notebook and looked over the rest of the day's schedule, thinking about what needed adjusting. Then I casually asked, by the way, what exactly was I saying in my sleep? You were dreaming about binding some kind of system. Ryan laughed while driving. I was saying, bro, can't you give me that system instead? Your life is already starting like some overpowered web novel. Let me be the protagonist for once too. I'll bind the system and crush everyone. Keep dreaming. I kicked the back of his seat and laughed. Just drive properly. Systems are standard equipment for transmigrators like me. Natives like you aren't qualified to bind one. Was I getting a little obsessed? Even in my sleep, I was dreaming about getting a system of my own. I silently mocked myself. Damn system. Don't wait until I've already ascended to immortality before finally showing up. Clown. More than 10 kilometers west of Shanghai stood Hongya Mountain, a natural scenic area rising 1,300 meters above sea level. Its winding mountain roads stretched like a giant dragon, coiling through the mountains, guiding visitors toward resorts of every size, and countryside guest houses. Some were family businesses run by local mountain residents, while others were summer resorts funded by major Shanghai investors, combining vacation, leisure, and entertainment among them. The largest was Hongya Mountain's Starlight Resort. It sat halfway up the mountain, facing south, with the sea spread out before it. From inside the resort, the entire city of Shanghai could be seen below. There was even a dedicated observatory. Whenever the weather was clear, it became an ideal place for astronomy enthusiasts to watch the stars filling the night sky. Starlight Resort was one of the Carter family's properties. Every member of the Carter family had their own private villa there. If they got tired of living at the Binhai District estate, they could come here and enjoy the peace and fresh mountain air. But at that moment, inside the red maple garden villa, the atmosphere was unusually heavy. Grandpa, a visibly pregnant woman who looked close to 30, walked into the living room and sat beside an elderly man. She had a beautiful, charming face and had clearly been blessed with good looks. But right now, anger simmered beneath her expression, even though she didn't dare let it out. That little bastard. Your precious eldest grandson had your 5th granddaughter thrown into the police station. The old man was Charles Carter. He gave the woman a cold glance, without saying anything, yet that single look made the woman tense and shift uneasily in her seat. Anger surged inside her. This was her grandfather, the same grandfather who had spoiled all of them since childhood, even after she'd grown up and taken over part of the family business. When she'd made mistakes, Grandpa had never looked at her so coldly. Every time, he would quietly clean up the mess for her, then teach her what she should have done differently. So, why was this time different? Helena. The coldness in Charles's eyes gradually softened, but he still didn't answer his eldest granddaughter's question. Instead, he asked, how are sales at Flash E-Mobility for the first 2 quarters this year? That's right. This woman was the eldest daughter of the Carter family's younger generation, Helena Carter. Like the eldest sisters in most real heir versus fake heir stories, she had entered the family business early and begun helping manage it. However, unlike those exaggerated stories, she hadn't doubled the family's business overnight or led the entire corporation to suddenly dominate some new industry. After all, by Helena's generation, the Carter family businesses had already been operating for at least 3 generations. Their interests were deeply intertwined, and every faction was entangled with every other one. Everyone had connections inside everyone else's territory. So making sweeping reforms was difficult. Extremely difficult. Shangrachang Group still looked rock solid on the surface and appeared to be developing steadily. Its newest long-term corporate strategy was still full of ambition, but in reality, Shangrachang's growth over the past several years was more like slow forward motion driven by the enormous inertia of its sheer size. Rather than genuine momentum, it was like a giant struggling through a swamp. The moment that inertia disappeared, the entire giant could collapse. That was why Helena had been smart. After working in the family business for several years and gaining enough experience, she'd left and chosen to start her own companies. She founded 2 businesses. One was called Jingrui Foods, which mainly produced spicy snack strips, instant noodles, ham sausages, and other packaged foods. That was her core business, backed by Shangrachang Group and Grandpa's connections. It quickly established itself in Shanghai, then expanded into surrounding markets, With livestream e-commerce booming over the past few years, Jingrui Foods had ridden the wave perfectly and was growing fast. Her other company was called Flash E-Mobility. Yes, it was the same store I'd visited during my market research, based on the news she'd followed and information she'd obtained from government contacts. Helena knew the country was absolutely determined to promote new energy vehicles, but for both her and the entire Shengrichang group. Even though Shengrichang had already become a true industrial giant, it still couldn't fully enter the automobile manufacturing industry, because building cars, even new energy vehicles, required an extremely long industrial supply chain and involved a huge number of specialized fields. The barriers to entry were incredibly high and required enormous amounts of capital. Competition in the market was also intense, and whether the business could even become profitable was uncertain. If it failed, the losses to the company would be massive. Helena knew directly manufacturing cars was impossible. That kind of move required the entire Shengrichang leadership team to discuss and approve it as a strategic decision, even with support from her grandfather and father. He still couldn't convince every shareholder to invest, but she could settle for something smaller, something that still belonged to the new energy sector, but carried far less risk. Electric motorcycles. Compared with cars, electric motorcycles were much easier to manufacture and didn't require the entire group to support the project. The required investment was relatively small, and even if it failed, the losses wouldn't be devastating. And as the daughter of an ultra-wealthy family, Helena naturally operated on a much grander scale than I did. She directly assembled a professional design team, built production lines, and opened company-owned stores in the best locations. She went all in from the very beginning, with advertising campaigns loud enough to shake the city. But the final result was probably only, Helena answered somewhat guiltily, a little over 1,000 units. Just over 1,000? Charles sneered inwardly. That was probably the total sales volume. From last year through the first 2 quarters of this year. His lips moved slightly, but in the end he said nothing. Only his icy gaze revealed a chilling disappointment. Forget it. Charles shook his head, his voice carrying helplessness and disappointment. Don't worry about Madison's situation. Call your husband Julian and have him come pick you up. I know you're busy with the company, but don't forget about your marriage. You two should spend more time together. Grandpa, Helena wanted to say something, but under her grandfather's commanding gaze, she had no choice but to stand, and leave. Just then, Butler Bennett, who had previously been at the Carter estate, walked in. He glanced at the departing Helena, then at Charles sitting on the couch, and sighed inwardly. The old master's disappointment in his eldest granddaughter was already obvious, and that disappointment wasn't only because of Flash E-Mobility's poor sales. It was also because of how Helena approached the family business. She had plans, but often rushed too aggressively. She had courage, yet hesitated when it was actually time to let go. She was intelligent, but even when the road ahead was obviously blocked, she still walked step by step into the same traps others had already fallen into. Charles sat there quietly, his gaze deep and complicated. After Helena left, Charles took a sip of tea. What do you think of Tyler's electric motorcycle plan? How feasible is it? Tyler's project. How far has it progressed? Charles asked calmly, with a trace of concern hidden in his eyes. Faced with the old master's question, Butler Bennett's expression became slightly complicated, neither excited and impressed, nor sharply critical in wealthy circles. Having good information channels was normal, especially when it came to movements in the business world. When I first started doing market research, Charles hadn't known about it. But once I began buying electric motorcycles in bulk, hiring people, and contacting manufacturers, it became impossible for him not to notice. When he learned that the direction of my startup overlapped with Helena's project, Charles couldn't help feeling disappointed. The electric motorcycle industry had swallowed countless small entrepreneurs whole, and even major companies didn't dare make it their primary focus. Helena's Flash E-Mobility project had already lasted 4 years, from the massive initial investment in building the factory to the ongoing operating expenses. The total amount invested had already made Charles's heart ache. He had originally planned to make Helena shut the project down after this year, but before his eldest granddaughter had finished losing money, his newly returned grandson had taken the money he'd squeezed out of him and jumped into the same fire. Charles couldn't help grumbling inwardly. Why did he have so many foolish children and grandchildren? Is it difficult to say? Charles noticed Butler Bennett's hesitation and the slight displeasure in his expression. Just say it. It's only $60 million. Besides, it's that brat's money now. This old man doesn't care about it. But as elders, we should still warn him before he loses the little capital he has left. Old master, don't get angry yet. Butler Bennett quickly handed him a document envelope. These materials were brought over by Daniel Lee, the former administrative manager of Flash E-Mobility's R&D department. They concern the young master's project. His proposal is highly feasible. But there are also considerable risks. Daniel Lee? Charles frowned. Wasn't he working under Helena? How did he end up with that brat? I arranged it. Butler Bennett explained. Miss Helena has been laying people off. Flash E-Mobility's design and R&D department was basically gutted. The young master happened to be starting a business. So I introduced Daniel to him. Layoffs. A hint of satisfaction appeared on Charles's face. It seems my eldest granddaughter finally knows that road is going nowhere. Good. At least she has some self-awareness. That way, when I tell her later this year to shut the company down and liquidate it, there won't be as much conflict. But now another grandson had jumped into the same industry, which gave Charles another headache. Still, since Butler Bennett had arranged for one of their own people to join the project, the losses might at least be smaller. He still needed to make that brat focus on giving his statement properly, Charles thought to himself. As for the successor, well, Robert was already like that. For now, he'd just have to keep him in place. They couldn't replace him yet. At least he could still keep the company stable. As for Ethan, Charles would leave him at his third sister's hospital for a while and let him gain some experience. After that, he could put Ethan in charge of a subsidiary and test him. If he still proved hopeless, then daughters 2 through 6 were all still unmarried anyway. Worst case, they could recruit a live-in son-in-law. And if that still didn't work, Robert could always try having another child. If Robert refused, then Charles wouldn't mind taking matters into his own hands. But the moment he opened the documents, Charles's expression became even more complicated than Butler Bennett's. Can this thing really work? Wasn't he supposed to be building an electric motorcycle? Why does this look like some kind of industrial? Charles forcibly swallowed the word garbage. Before it left his mouth, the documents contained design drawings, concept sketches, as well as the first prototype, assembled by those recent graduates, and the finalized prototype, built from the revised production-ready design. If a gamer had been there, they probably would have said, the first prototype looked like something straight out of an industrial wasteland. A bunch of scrap parts thrown together into a piece of junk that somehow moved. As for the second prototype, anyone from the same world as me would have recognized it immediately. It was basically the classic cheap electric scooter. And visually, it wasn't even as impressive as Helena's first product. It can work, Butler Bennett nodded. If we judge purely from the design and concept, this thing might genuinely revive the entire electric two-wheeler market. Butler Bennett had spent years serving one of the wealthiest families around and had followed Charles for a long time, although he didn't personally run businesses. Years of exposure had given him solid judgment. Charles picked up the remaining documents and compared them with my design requirements. His eyes gradually brightened too. My approach from the very beginning had been completely different from Helena's. Helena's first product had been built around originality and independent innovation. He had hired a large team and demanded something completely different from every electric motorcycle already on the market. Ideally, they were supposed to create an entirely new design that clearly distinguished itself from competing products. The result had naturally been a complete failure. Her research team spent a long time without producing a design anyone was satisfied with. Eventually, after Charles advised her, she compromised and began designing based on existing market products. But even then, many of the details were incompatible with standard market components. To put it in extreme terms, even the screws practically required their own custom screwdriver. Helena was confident. Jingrui Foods' success had convinced her that she could replicate that success. with Flash e-mobility too.